Home is where the heart is. An Englishman's home is his castle. Mi casa es su casa. Welcome home. There's no place like home. Take me home. Get out of my home. Well, look, is there anything more emotive and precious than the topic of a home? Well, get set to turbocharge those emotions, folks. The time has come. Home to our very own football club since 1896. This week, the potential ownership of the place, every single one of us calls our home from home edges nearer. A pending fan vote on the viability of the county ground joint venture between, in effect, Swindon Town Football Club's present custodian and Trust STFC is a matter of days away. It's been a heavy week of contract dissection and explanation. Trust STFC have appeared before Swindon Town fans already this week, courtesy of Vic Morgan and the official supporters club, plus Rich Pullen and the Low Strangers pod to discuss obstacles, explore your objections and calm nerves. And we're delighted to be their final port of call for a certain Tom Parris and Neil Hutchings journey. And with your help, our questions will be anything but a cherry on top stuff. The guys want your grilling. Masochistically? Probably, but let's put that commitment to the test tonight. Please do get involved, dear listener. This truly is history-defining stuff, so be sure to play your role. Don't miss your chance to put your questions to Trust STFC and, by virtue, the County Ground Joint Venture, or what you may hear referred to CGJV. Easy for you to say, Rich Pullen. Well, if you're not a regular listener to the Tom Broadbent Lounge, or you're just unsure how to get involved, well, we'll accept your tweets, we'll accept your DMs. You can even hit, and we would love you to hit, speaker request on your little dashboard that you can see for your chance to ask your questions in person to Trust STFC live and directly. As always, your best contributions get to win the Sir Tom Broadbent Lounge goodie bag, including Dan Design's prints and a limited edition Sir Tom Broadbent Lounge hoodie. We're also going to be discussing the departure of a certain Scott Lindsay and indeed his potential replacement. We've got Saturday's return of the King to discuss. The women have been in action as well. And joining me this evening are none other than Joe. How are we, Joe?
Good evening, Hannahs. This week has been extremely quiet and don't like it.
Yep. We've got, well, do you know what? We might talk about a certain Stephen Darby. We might. But yeah, God, what a week, Joe, eh? What a week. But
yeah, Swindon Town Women.
But more of that to come, because I've also got Ellis to introduce. How are you, Ellis?
Good evening. I'm good, thank you.
Yes,
how are you?
Mate. I'm absolutely rock and roll. I'm exhausted. This feels more like a Friday than it does a blinking Wednesday night, mate. I don't mind telling you.
Yeah, there's never a dull day in STFC world.
Will we have it any other way? Well, as I'm getting older, I sometimes wonder, but the answer at the moment remains no. As always, the man that puts the no in Northerner, Chris P. How are we, Chris?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. How's you?
Yeah, well, you just heard. It's all good in the hood, pal. We've alongside Chris, we've got Jason. How are you, Jason?
Swindon Town, nothing to see here. Yeah, I'm very good. How are you?
Yes, indeed. And I'm delighted to say, finalising my panel, our recruitment here is complete. In true sort of Moneyball style, I've been out on the recruit, and I'm delighted our latest recruit, Chris Kelly, joins us. How are you, Chris?
Hello, mate.
Yeah,
how
welcome.
Are you? I'm up.
Show for you, pal. How does it feel?
It is, yeah. I'm fully expecting my hoodie in the post sometime soon as payment for me staying up late on a Wednesday night.
No, I pay you. I pay my panel in kind, Chris. We're that kind of show.
Absolutely.
But welcome, Chris. Hopefully, a long and illustrious future with the Sir Tom Broadbent Lounge. Settle yourself down. Pick your favourite chair. Your hoodie's in the post, and of course. Joining my wonderful panel, I have the delightful Tom Parris. How are we, Tom?
I'm good. Thank you very much, Hannahs. How are you doing?
Yes, mate. Yeah, as you just heard, it's kind of been one of those weeks. But, mate, we're doing okay. I say we're doing okay, but I've just noticed that Neil's dropped off the listener list. The speaker list. So I don't know if Neil's with us. So we're going to try.
He did drop off, but I think he's a listener at the moment rather than a
He's a
speaker.
listener, is he, the rascal? So if you're listening, Neil, it's easier for you to hit speaker request and you'll pop up at the top of my list. We've got so many people joining us at the moment that I'm finding you quite hard to find. But we will get you back on ASAP. Tom, while we're trying to sort Neil out, quite the week you've had.
Yeah, it's been a little bit busy. Just a little bit though, nothing too dramatic. But just in a normal week, really, in a lot of senses.
Yeah, how have you? So, it's fair to say that the fans haven't held back. You know, you've had two thoroughly good grillings from two people I trust immensely in both Rich Pullen on behalf of the Low Strangers audience and of course the inimitable Vic Morgan in relation to the official supporters club. What's really filled me full of positivity, Bud, is that in the setup of this show, he says calling you Bud like we're old, like it's an old boys network. But in setup of this show, the thing that I just want to impress on our guys listening in, all of our audience listening in, is that you truly are up for no holds barred, right? So we've already had a glut of questions in. If there are any questions that are rolling in or you're considering, but you're umming and ahhing, if you're a first-time question asker, please do send your speaker requests in. Like I would just love to be able to demonstrate that this hasn't been kind of, I'm not a political beast, Tom, was what I'm trying to say. I'm not a political beast. and the thing that always bugs me about these kind of gigs is that there's always someone willing to turn around and go, oh, yeah, but the vote's been nobbled, or, oh, yeah, but... So it's great that we've had so many questions sent in advance, but I really do want people to interact live with us tonight and put questions to you spontaneously, because for me, that'll feel like a true test. Anyway, I've been hopelessly waffling away while we've been trying to sort Neil's invite out. It has been resent, you'll be pleased to know, dear listeners, but... at the moment, we don't seem to be able to get Neil back on. So,
the joys of live broadcasting.
Isn't it? Yeah.
That's why we love it. The chaos.
Okay, let's just try.
If you can, if he's basically wearing a penguin suit and hugging somebody in another suit with a purple tie by the looks of his profile picture.
Don't worry, mate. I've got him located and I'm sent.
He's showing as a speaker on mine.
Yeah,
mine. Neil, if he's showing a speaker on, Neil, try and speak to us. Can you speak to us? Because you're not showing up on mine.
Oh,
hey, there he is, Neil. Turn that mic on, and you're away.
Well, let's see if it works for the fifth time.
Success, ladies and gentlemen. Success. We are here. So we've got the full panel, and we've got both of the good gentlemen from Trust STFC. Neil, thank you ever so much for joining us. I think we could go around the houses and do polite intros like we're sat around in a council meeting, but that's not really the Tom Broadbent Lounge vibe. So I'm going to put it to you like this, Neil. When did you start supporting Town?
8 years old. Don't ask me what the game was. It was a long time ago.
Favourite player?
Fjortoft.
Favourite moment?
Oh, blimey. Charlton away.
Favourite
playoff semi-final.
Favourite Trust member?
Tom. I've got to say that. He's on the phone.
Thanks, Neil. Love you
poor Alex is listening. He's not going to be impressed.
They all are.
And I hate to do this, Neil. Favourite cheese?
I like a good goat cheese.
A good goat cheese. And last but not least, who would win in a fight? A chicken-sized elephant or an elephant-sized chicken?
Got to be the elephant-sized chicken.
That'll do me nicely. Right, moving on to you, Tom. How long you been a fan?
Coming up 20 years, easy.
Most hated player?
Gotta be Taylor Curran, isn't it?
Last time you screamed forward?
I don't think I ever have.
Ever eaten a pastry in a town end?
Oh, yes. Yeah, one too many, for
Ever
sure.
used a broken urinal?
No, I haven't.
You've sat in the Stratton Bank?
No, in honesty, I've never sat in the Stratton Bank. One of my bucket list items, shall we say?
Fair dues. Well, look, boys, you're very, very welcome. Suffice to say, you passed the fan test. Politicians here, we are not. But nonetheless, we've got some serious business to attend to. We've got quite a few questions, and some of these. I think probably the best way to put this is they kind of feel a little bit everyman in approach, and I make absolutely no apologies for that. And the way that I would see this up, dear listener, is that the two shows preceding us, both Vic and Rich's shows, are of such good quality and of such depth that if you feel there is anything that doesn't get asked tonight, I'm pretty bloody confident that they have deep dived into this subject enough that between the three of our shows, we've covered off everything. And the nice thing is we've been able to cherry pick things that and questions that have been put in such a way that I think we really are kind of filling in any potential gaps. Or if we are doubling over stuff that's already been asked of you two good gentlemen, I think you're going to find it's been asked in a certain way where maybe it wasn't clear on the other shows, or like I said, I don't want to call, we're not tabloidy, but I think you'll get the gist when we start asking the questions. So the first one is this, and Neil, this is a question for you. It's from Hugh via DM, and he says, a simple question, trust STFC. Why should we trust STFC or Clem as Swindon Town fans?
That's a fair question. So in terms of trust STFC, the reason that the council have been working with the trust for now around 7 years on this is that the trust is more than just a supporters group. There's a really boring piece of legislation called the Cooperative and Community Benefit Societies Act, which, if you like, I can read all 107 pages to you. But the most important part of that act states that as a registered society, Trust STFC have to hold any asset that we have for the benefit of the community and its members. So what that means is that once we own 50% of the stadium, we've got no ability to sell it off to a commercial party, pay dividends to its members, act in a way which goes against the long-term benefits of the supporters and the wider community. And we're the only supporter group around Swindon Town that have that asset lock. It's legally binding. We can't get out of it. So when we own 50% of the stadium, for the supporters, they should take confidence that there is a real kind of lock around what we can do with the stadium. It's got to be about the long-term interest.
So why do you do it, Neil? Why do you do it? Why are you part of the trust?
So I'm a relatively new member to the trust. I joined in March, to the trust board. I joined back in March 22, so I've been on board for about 10 months now. Professionally, I spend most of my life negotiating commercial deals, negotiating contracts. I'm not a lawyer, but I spend most of my time in that kind of space. And I could see what was coming up with the county ground. I've been a lifelong supporter. It's easy sat in the stands having an opinion on everything. I thought it was time for me to roll my sleeves up and get stuck in.
Outstanding. How about you, Tom? What was the lure of the trust to you? Like, again, if that's coming along the lines of, you two guys are literally being asked by your everyman town fan here, like, why should we put our trust in you? Like, why you, Tom? Why should we put our trust in you and Neil and and the trust and why are you specifically doing it?
So over the last good couple of decades, really, the club's been in this topsy-turvy, in somewhat of a largely downward trend. And we've seen a lot of our, what was competitors 10, 15, 20 years ago, superiorly higher than where we are now. And there's a lot of inspiration and lessons of why they've been able to sustain and why Swindon ultimately has fallen onto hard times at periods. And the true inspiration really was in two parts to it. One, that we managed to get rid of He Who Shall Not Be Named. And an owner came in that made all the right sounds and genuinely just made me feel like, for the first time in my time supporting the club, that they genuinely cared and they really wanted to make it happen. In combination with the county ground, we've heard God knows how many redevelopment proposals and new stadiums and all sorts over the years as well. And buying the county ground in the manner that we are was really, it was the golden egg. It's the one that made the most sense. It was the one that seemed the most reasonable, the most logical. And for me, being part of, what I hope in the past now is our rock bottom, that with the steps that we're now taking, it becomes that new foundation in which we can strive to build again, climb the leagues, be successful off the pitch, to be successful on the pitch. Don't get me wrong, that's not going to be a straight line upwards. There is going to be ups, there are going to be downs. But if you take a step back in 10 years' time and overall we have gone upwards, then that for me is success. And that's part of the inspiration to be part of that, to really energize and push that forward as much as possible. And the club's dear to my heart, heartbeat of the community, for many, many reasons. And why the hell not? Why not?
Two cracking answers, gents. Thank you very much. Joe, I believe you've got the next question.
I do indeed, yeah. So this one's come through from Martin via DMs. He's just asked, please could you explain who the people are driving the county ground joint venture in the event of a positive vote and eventual purchase? So who's going to be in charge of driving this forward if and when a positive vote is guaranteed?
Is that more from like a trust perspective, or
I suppose it's probably both, to be honest, like from the trust and from the club. I mean, I'm assuming from the club side it's going to be Clem and Rob, I'd guess. But yeah, I mean, both if possible.
So from a strict kind of legal point of view, the joint venture company will have 6 directors. 2 of those directors will be nominated from the trust board. 2 of them will be nominated by the club. And then 2 ED trustees will also be joining the board, one representing the supporters through the trust and the other representing the club. So in total, you'll have 6 legal directors of the joint venture company. There will be 2 shareholders. The club will be a shareholder and the trust will be a shareholder. And that's quite important because a lot of the decisions that get taken that affect the long-term stability of the ground and its ownership, like the lease, like the shares that are owned by the trust and the club, any security, any debt lending that goes against the ground, all those things are called reserved matters. And reserved matters require the approval of the shareholders. And in that event, and this is where we'll start getting a little bit technical, quite a large number of the reserved matters will come back to the membership of the trust, in the same way that we've gone to the trust membership for the vote at the moment to go ahead and buy the stadium. We will have to go to the membership and ask their approval for certain things that happen to the county ground. And so from a control point of view, there's a kind of a legal kind of framework. But from a trust membership point of view, if you're a member of the trust and you're sharing in the ownership of the county ground, then certain decisions will have to come back to the membership for their approval.
So are you clearly the members that are going to come together, Neil, to make up the CGJV board will be sort of put to vote. So it's not like you've already earmarked people for roles, like they will be democratically elected. Is that right?
Yeah, so one of the rule changes that are going out to vote at the moment is that the rules of the trust, the society, are being amended so that the people that go onto the JV board representing the supporters has to be an elected member of the trust board. So it can be somebody who's co-opted. It can be just somebody that we pick off the street. It's got to be somebody that's already been elected by the members to the trust board. And then the trust board, of which there's currently 12 members of the trust board, will nominate and decide who the 2 people are that go on to the JV board. And they can be removed at any time. They're limited to what they can agree to by the legal agreements and the trust rules. So it's not a free-for-all. They'll still have to report back to the trust board and to the membership. So those 2 people haven't been decided yet. We're waiting to see if the vote gets the support that we're hoping it does. And we've got a trust board meeting on Tuesday night next week to take the next steps, and one of those being to agree who the supporter representatives will be on the JV board.
Now, Chris, this is your show debut, but I think the boys have already kind of asked your question, I believe. But fire away, Chris, and there might be a twist that comes off of this.
Well, we can try it and see what happens, can't we? So the next question, guys, and hello, by the way. Nice to meet you over Twitter Spaces. Basically, we're asking, is the trust chair going to remain the lead on the joint venture moving forward? I think you've kind of answered it, but I think the question's kind of probably a little bit about the structure, really, of how the trust and the joint venture works together. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't think there is a clean answer we can really give to you. Like Neil's already said, really, at the moment there is no one guaranteed to be on that board. First and foremost, we need to make sure that we clear the 50% of our membership to be voting in the vote. The second part of that is then that 75% of all those that have voted need to vote for yes. Once that is then confirmed, then we'll be able to take the next steps in terms of identifying within the board who wants to go and sit on that joint venture board, and as a board we decide who will represent us, and that's the kind of process we are at the moment. We aren't taking although we're trying to move forward as much as possible and kind of plan ahead, there are certain protocols and processes in place that unfortunately we can't go any faster than that. We need to take one step at a time, and just take it easy a little bit and just let the process flow naturally before we be able to confirm any of that. And that's really about as far as I can say, really.
No. Appreciate that. I was just wondering, is there quite a lot of separation in between, legally at least, between the joint venture and the trust? Do you have to have that kind of clear blue water between the two?
Yeah, so the trust is obviously the Swindon Town Community Mutual. That's in its own right an organisation. The joint venture is a completely separate organisation, in which that is split 50-50 between Swindon Town FC and obviously Swindon Town Community Mutual, which is the trust. So they are completely separate organisations. Part of the paperwork that we're obviously talking about, there's three real elements to it. One is the purchase agreement. The second is the joint venture agreement, which is essentially like a shareholders agreement. And then the third one is then the lease between the joint venture and Swindon Town FC. So from a clear blue water perspective, yes, there is defined separation between each of the organisations, including Swindon Town FC on the other side. But fundamentally, the assets owned in the joint venture are owned by the organisations of the parent organisation. It's no different to the parent organisation from Clem owning Swindon Town FC, if you catch my drift. So yeah, there is clear separation between all of them.
Lovely. Cheers, Chris, and thanks, guys. While we've been speaking, a few live tweets have been rolling in. Tom, I know I know that you don't necessarily want to get overly bogged down at this juncture in terms of actual redevelopment specifics, but nonetheless, I'm going to read the questions out just so the listeners know that we're acknowledging that, and then you might want to explain probably why we're not quite at that pitch yet. But so Steve Terrell was good evening, Steve. Steve's tweeted, can the Stratton Bank be used as safe standing homestand? Craggers, Mr. CJ Stevens, good evening to you. Craggers says, anyone have a view on saving the original floodlights for posterity in the event of redevelopment? They are some of the last of their kind and have become iconic. Once they're gone forever. So could they be preserved if they're not going to be used? So I don't know whether I'll leave those two sort of with you, Tom, as sort of like a topic for redevelopments. If there's anything you want to say on those specifics, mate, the floor is yours. But we've had a conversation off air, haven't we, about specifics of redevelopment. So, as I say, mate, the floor's yours.
Yeah, so it's really difficult with the redevelopment. Like I said about even nominating and putting people of the trust board onto the County Ground Joint Venture Board. We're taking it one step at a time. Obviously, there's been conversations in terms of ideas of what we could do. That's been well discussed within a lot of the media, and kind of artist pictures of what could happen. But realistically, at this point in time, there is very little value in discussing anything in regards to the redevelopment, as much as that's obviously the most exciting part, rather than the legal perspective of buying the ground and formalising that entire arrangement. But we're not getting carried away with ourselves right now. We need to focus on ensuring that our trust members vote in favour, if they do agree, of course, with this proposal to buy the county ground, and be part of that joint venture. That is purely our number one focus. And I think the club is in the same process as well. Like, they're very focused. There's been a lot of conversations and back and forth about getting this across the line. A lot of energy has gone into it over the last couple of months. It's definitely increased in intensity. But let's not forget as well, this has taken us 7 to 8 years to get to where we are. It's a marathon and not a sprint. And it's the same as well when we buy the actual county ground and form that joint venture. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take time. It's going to take time to work out what the best options are. Ultimately, what we're working towards is projects that deliver return of investment, because ultimately those projects that deliver on that return of investment the quickest will have a positive impact on what we see on the pitch, and also fund further redevelopment as well. So yes, as much as I would love to sit here and start talking about the floodlights, which to me are, well, from my understanding, they are one of the original sets of floodlights ever installed in the UK. It would be great to keep hold of them. The Stratton Bank would love for that to be safe standing, but these are only my opinions. And until we really get the county ground purchased, be able to sit down and discuss it as a combined joint venture with the club, understand our financing options, etc., then we'll be able to really start talking about redevelopment.
Now, Neil, Tom said there about it being a marathon, not a sprint, but you are actually contractually obligated to crack on with a fairly significant project within the first year, are you not?
Yeah, that's right, Hannes. The council just don't want to sell us the ground and then it sits there in the same state it has for the last 50 years. So one of the conditions of the contract is that within the first 3 years from completion, we need to start development on a particular project. Now, the original discussions when we were talking to the council last year was that was probably going to be the Stratton Bank, but we've now got a little bit more flexibility. So long as the project that we go at first has a value of more than £1 million, and we sign contracts and we've got planning permission and all that kind of good stuff within 3 years, then we're good to go. So I think the aspiration is to start way before that. But from a legal point of view, we've got 3 years to get started.
And we won't hold you to this, Neil. But if you were a betting man, what would you say would probably be one of the sort of the easiest to achieve developments within that kind of financial sort of framework? Would it be a roof on the bank? Would it be the corners of the stand? What would make sense if it was your decision?
If it was solely my decision, I think if you take half a step back and think about the two reasons we're doing what we're doing, one from a supporter's point of view is to get control over the stadium and make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. We've seen plenty of stories over the years, and our friends up the A420 being a good example, where the stadium is owned by a different party than owns the football club, and therefore nobody can do anything to the stadium. So the first priority is getting it in safe hands, getting under control, and stopping it going anywhere that we wouldn't want it to. But the other part is about the club, and we all want more money to go into the playing budget. We all want it to be more successful on the pitch. And one of the problems with the county ground today is it only makes revenue at 3 o'clock on a Saturday and sometimes on a Tuesday night. The function rooms and the bars get used from time to time, but there's no real revenue flowing through the club apart from on a match day. So the sooner we can get it under control, the sooner we can start redeveloping the place. For me, it's about driving additional revenue, and it might not be focusing on the easiest project to start with. It may be that we focus on one that's going to drive the most revenue, because the sooner the club's making more money, the sooner we're going to see more money going into the playing budget, and that can't be a bad thing.
It is a really good point, Neil, because I think throwing a roof on the Stratton Bank is something that's been talked about for the last sort of as long as I can remember as a fan, to be totally frank. It was one of the first stands that I ever stood in when I sort of was a nipper, and that'll give you an idea, because I'm a right old duffer now. But I think it's going to require some sort of support of patience in parts, isn't it? Because it may well be that some of this stuff, some of this development, isn't necessarily that as high visibility as maybe some might expect. Would you say that's fair?
It is, and I'd say that on two levels. I think the first is that, and it goes back to the point that Tom was making a moment ago. We've been kind of at this for a while now as a group of supporters, and there's been a few kind of false starts. The next step is about spending money with architects and designers and stuff like that. And there's no point spending that kind of money if you don't have the certainty that you own the stadium. So I think there's every chance that once we get the keys to the ground, it might go quiet again for a while. And that's not that there's no work being done. It's about getting stuck into those more technical things. I think the other thing to consider is that whatever development we do, it can impact the pitch at the wrong time. There's a very small window where we can kind of do things on the pitch in terms of developing the ground before the next season starts. So that's all got to be taken into account. I think the final thing I'd say on this, Hannah, is that although all the talk is about all the sexy stuff like redeveloping stadiums and hotels and stuff like that, there's a lot of things that need doing around the ground that have just had sticking plasters put over them for a long time. And one of the benefits here is the rent that the club will pay to the joint venture. All of that gets reinvested back into the stadium, and it goes into repairs and dilapidations and kind of stops the leaks and making some bits a bit more comfortable. So it's not all about those big projects. It's also about getting the day-to-day match day experience back up to a level. Because let's think about it. The stadium hasn't really changed that much in years. I mean, apart from the Don Rogers, there's been no real major development or much repairs done to the place in years. So there's a lot to be done. It's not all going to happen overnight, though.
Right. Ellis has got a question that's come in from Andy on Twitter. So Andy Footner has tweeted in. Ellis, the floor is yours, pal.
Yeah. So essentially, what happens in the event of a no vote?
Then we really need to go back to the drawing board and assess our options on how best to proceed. It would be quite difficult in terms of trying to work our way through that. But obviously, if it is a no vote, then we respect the wishes of our members, and we'll assess our options and try and come up with a different plan of how to make it more acceptable to our members, and understand really what the problems are to why we obtain that no vote.
There'll be a lot of wound licking, basically, is what we're saying, Tom, and reworking.
Well, yeah, like we said, it's been a long time coming to get to this point. The trust has been very open, even prior to me joining the board, about the ambitions of, owning the county ground, having a significant say within the club. And this is a major milestone. It's something that's never been achieved or attempted before in our knowledge to anywhere else in the world. This is a significant moment for the fan base to come together and work with their football club, protect their football club in a way that, other fans at this point, in hindsight, would only dream of. It's a marvellous opportunity that, in my opinion, it is one in a million. So, and in particular with the funding that we are receiving to make that happen, where essentially it's not costing us or the club a penny to actually acquire the county ground. It's a gift from the gods in a lot of ways, without getting into any religion here.
No. Let's call it as it is. The late
blessing.
Nigel Eady is a Swindon Town god. Make no mistake about it. God rest his soul. God bless him. What a gesture! I cannot imagine. Sorry to interrupt, Tom, but I really do. The one thing that it's not necessarily been underplayed. There's been a lot of kind of like, hat tipping in his direction, rightly so this week. But I don't mind telling you, like I've lost count the number of times I've had conversations on my run around the M25, M3, M4, where my kids and I sit there and discuss, if I came into a load of money, what would we do with it? And it always gets down to how would we invest it into the football club? So to actually see the real life version of that unfolding right now, it's all the language you're using, Tom, I think is absolutely spot on. I think it's an incredible thing that Nigel and his and his trustees have gifted the club. I mean, I haven't got the superlatives for it. It's amazing.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't even think that Nigel himself, when writing his will and gifting the club and its supporters this amazing gesture, would ever have dreamed of really what could be achieved with that. And I hope wherever he is now that he is able to see that in some shape or form. Because it's a true legacy, absolute true legacy. And I really relate it back to even the early days of the club. Like we walk past the Arkle stand every single game. We look at it if you're sat in the Don Rogers stand, but that entire stand was gifted to the club at a £700 investment in the early days. And it's forever named the Arkle stand for that incredible gesture. And this is another level on what was offered back then by Thomas Arkles of the £700 to build the stand. This is just another level, next generation to set us up for the future.
Yeah, thank you, Nigel Eady and trustees. On behalf of every single Swindon Town fan out there, it's truly astounding. Just Andy, there was a second part to Andy's question. He sort of followed up almost immediately with another tweet, which said, "I don't know whether you want this, Neil, or whether you want this, Tom. It's entirely up to you guys. Andy's asking, will dividends be paid to shareholders in future years?"
No. Anyone would think we rehearsed that. So it goes back to the point I was making a moment ago, that because of the asset lock, even if the county ground is kind of spilling out hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of cash through the joint venture, the 50% that we own of that as supporters, fingers crossed, we have no ability to share any of that value with the supporters. It has to be invested back through the county ground and the making sure that the community and the membership benefit, not personally, but through the asset and the wider club, but not the kind of the on the field stuff, but more the infrastructure around us. So that's in law. We're unable to do that legally. So that's why the supporters should take comfort about the fact that this is going in through the trust.
And this is more of a request than a question, and it feeds into what we're saying about development. But this is from Seaside Reds, who says the Rolex / Deacon's clock definitely needs to be preserved as per the floodlights. So one for your notes there, guys, in bold, italic, and underlined. Pretty please.
We certainly know when Seaside Red speaks up, we need to listen. Otherwise, he'll be holding us to account for sure. So duly noted.
So I want Rob to open up the arsenal on you guys, and I'm sure he is going to be doing that before the show is out. Chris, you've got the next question for the guys.
And I apologise ahead of time for the name I'm going to mention here. But Lee Power instigated these discussions and his ownership of the club became highly vitriolic. What happens if the same happens with Clem?
Yeah, let me take that one, Tom. So it's a very fair question. And from a supporters' trust point of view, that's been something that's been on our minds for some time. We're very lucky that we through the the weekly legal calls that we have with Rob and Clem and the lawyers who have given their time freely over the last kind of 6 to 9 months, and in one case even longer than that. It's a good relationship. We where we disagree on stuff, there's sensible conversations about it, and it's taken probably a good 6 months to negotiate around 200 pages of legal agreement. But every time we've agreed something, we've looked at it in a way that says if Clem was to get fed up of the Wiltshire weather in the deepest winter and moved on and sold it on to somebody who may be like an owner that we've had before, how would the legal agreement work in that context? So although we're not in a position where we've fallen out with the owner, we've certainly thought about it, because this is a 250-year deal. This is a multi-generation arrangement that we're putting in place, and we can't predict who the owner is going to be in the long term. I mean, we'd love it to be the supporters at one stage, but were we to go backwards and end up under a Lee Power type owner, then as much as you can through legal agreements, because not every legal agreement can be 100% watertight, we've done everything that we can to think of every scenario to ensure that if we found ourselves back in that position again, then the legal agreements would protect us.
Neil, I mean, I know we've got to be a little bit careful here, but I mean, Clem's been on the show. He was much like you guys. He was like, literally, there's no question I'm afraid of. So, don't feel like, I don't. Although he was a little nervous about media, I think that was his biggest concern, that that he came across as being that people would read into his awkwardness more than anything. But he's certainly never been afraid of any questions. But you've obviously, you guys have had experience of the previous owner and Clem, and you mentioned the previous owner's style of ownership, and discuss that as almost being like a retrograde. Could you sort of describe to us the differences that you've encountered since you've been working with Clem? Because obviously he spends a lot of time out the country, like around the other side of the world. There are times where communications as a consequence of that are quite hard, and supporters, I think, struggle with that as well at times, because you don't necessarily see him as visibly as you do, the previous ownership. So could you give us a flavour as to what the differences are, what you've encountered?
Sure. I mean, I can talk kind of in first hand about Clem, because we've been working closely over the last few months. I think the best person to kind of talk about the previous owner is Steve Houghton, who I understand had quite an up and down relationship with. I've never met Lee Power, never had any involvement with him, so it'd be wrong of me to try and make any comparisons or make any judgments on that one. In terms of Clem, I find him to be very sharp. He's a very sharp businessman. He gets very frustrated if things take longer than he wants. This process has gone on far longer than he ever wanted. And I think that shows that he's keen to make things happen. And I think when we do get this all sorted out, that he certainly won't be sitting on his hands. He'll want to be driving this forward and making a real difference. He's passionate. I like him. I as a chairman, as an owner, I could think of a lot of worse people that we could have. But I've only ever found him anything but straight. He's down the line. He says what he thinks. And sometimes that's not what we want to hear as supporters, and we've had to negotiate around a few things. But he also understands that the supporters are here for the long term. And although it's frustrated him, sometimes we've wanted stuff in the contract because of the risk of who comes after Clem rather than Clem himself. And I think that's taken a little while for us all to get our heads around. But I think he accepted it in the end, that the supporters are here forever. It may be the next generation and the generation after that. So, but look, I can only speak as I found, and I've been very impressed with Clem.
Look, I mean, I'm not going to betray any confidences there. I need to be very careful, because when we launched our show, it was off the back of me being sick and tired of 35 years of understandably negative sort of mindsets amongst Swindon Town supporters. And from me, I was like, you know what? I found this way to kind of reach out into our, into a large chunk of our fan base and do something which is just fundamentally a little bit more upbeat, a little bit more positive. And one of the one of the downsides of that positivity is that people have been very keen to call us happy clappers, to call us clembots, all this kind of stuff. And I appreciate in our role as almost like as a media partner, there has to be this element of objectivity. But I can only call things. I mean, I'm a fan. I'm just like anyone else that's listening tonight, anyone else that goes and pays their money at the county ground on Saturday. Like literally, there's nothing special about my existence, and so I think my view on Clem as an owner, I'm only ever going to be honest about it. And I think that the thing that I would say, just to sort of echo your point, Neil, is that I had a conversation with Clem, and it went along the lines of Clem couldn't understand at one point, why, he was getting, there was some negativity around. I can't remember exactly what the subject was, but there was some negativity and people having a dig. And he was like, look, I don't know what more I've got to do to kind of, to sort of suggest that, or to prove to people that I'm the real deal, that, I really have got all the best of intentions. I'm trying to push on with the ground purchase. I'm putting money into the club. I'm clearing debts. I'm going to the courts. I'm fighting the good fight. And I don't know if you guys have come across this, but there is a cultural difference between Brits and Aussies, in that Aussies haven't got time for. I said to him, "You're too good to be true, Clem. That's the biggest problem." I said, and in the British mindset, if you're too good to be true, you usually are. So, something seems too good to be true, you usually are. So, and he was like, "Well, that's complete crap." And then we had this big conversation around the cultural differences between Australia and Brits. And he was like, literally, that's nothing. But it was interesting how he was very open to trying to understand where this frustration comes from. And, we talked about the administrations. We talked about promotion and double demotion. We talked about winning the league and then being hit by COVID. We talked about all the stuff that we all know all too well. And he was very sympathetic about that. But I guess what I'm trying to say is I concur with you, Neil. I think I've looked Clem in the eye, I've shook his hand, I've asked him what his vision is, and I've believed him because he's been spontaneous. I didn't get the sense that, I had 20 years in business, I had 6 years as a response copper. I'm pretty used to dealing with bullshitters, I don't mind telling you. I don't get the impression that he is. And ultimately, listen, who am I? I could be fooled, but I don't believe he is. It's fair to say that that's reflected in your views.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, to be fair to Clem, I think anybody who kind of steps into that role after the kind of, how many years, 10, 15, 20 years of different owners and stories and headlines that we've had, I think all of us as supporters deserve to be a bit cynical at times. And I do think that after that run of kind of bad luck with our owners, that Clem or anybody else stepping in, being somebody that all of a sudden seems to have turned the corner and seems to have a bit more of the club's interests at heart, is probably going to be challenged in the way that Clem has. So I think it's probably less about Clem as a person and more about the fact that we're all a bit tired of kind of the behind the scenes stuff. We just want to see success on the pitch again.
Yeah, and I guess that's also the point, because there were points in the previous owner's tenure where he was, saluted for making the club sustainable, reducing the budgets right down. There were positives. We travelled to Wembley under his stewardship, and and then obviously COVID struck and things went downhill very, very, very quickly, didn't they? So there's nothing to say that can't happen with Clem, and that's nothing to say that we're not making a personal judgment on the previous owner here, and that's the thing. It's very easy for football fans to get vitriolic, but. I guess the sort of story so far, Neil, would it be fair to say so far so good?
Yeah, I think so. But I think you're also right, Hannah, is that there will be times that Rob and Clem get stuff wrong. If we think they're going to get every decision right, I think we're a bit delusional. And they will make mistakes and they will get stuff wrong. And I'd hope that they would listen to the people around them, and they'd listen to the likes of the RSC and the trust and yourselves. And even though we have that strong relationship with them, it won't stop us. Certainly, from a trust perspective, I know it's true. It wouldn't stop us from challenging Rob and Clem if we think they really are on the wrong side of an issue. So I know I've heard the happy clapper thing quite a lot going around on social media, and I've seen it aimed at the trust as well. All I can kind of assure people is, from a trust perspective, we will reach out to Rob and Clem if we think they're on the wrong side of stuff. And the fact that we have the relationship through the joint venture and the county ground doesn't change that.
Yeah, and I'll take the opportunity just to sort of jump in and sort of, kind of polish our crest a little bit here, because I've made it very, very clear to Clem, to Rob, to Sandro, that all the while we believe that, the club management are acting honourably and they're being transparent and so on and so forth. We'll always challenge, but we're not just going to bash people if we feel that there's nothing there to bash them about. But at the same time, they're very, very well aware, as I think we've probably demonstrated over the last 4 to 6 weeks, that if things aren't the way that we kind of hope or have been promised, we'll be one of the first voices to step up, and rightly so. And it's good to hear that from a trust point of view, you retain that standpoint, despite the fact you're entering into this joint venture. Jason, you've got the next question, buddy.
Yeah, I have indeed. This is sent in via Luke via WhatsApp, and he asks, how do the trust feel about partnering with the club on the back of last week's media blackout?
Oh yeah, very timely, given the last topic of conversation.
The media blackout was an interesting piece, and in terms of referencing Neil, saying that we challenged the club, you'll be delighted to know that we did have that conversation with the club, and we put our opinions forward, and they were listened to. Now, the one thing to say about the club in terms of the relationship around the joint venture is that it's quite different in terms of the relationship that we've got around the advisory board. The advisory board is owned by the club. They are there to ask for opinions, and it's within their right to either acknowledge those opinions and do something about it, or say, no, I disagree, and carry on. The difference of where that comes in with the joint venture is that it is a 50-50 legal partnership. So, as much as the club run their social media how they see fit, that's completely up to them. Our role and our remit is to ensure that the club, whoever the owner is, whoever the manager is, whoever the players on the pitch are, our role is to make sure that for the next 250 years and beyond, that Swindon Town continue to exist and they have a place to call home and stands for fans to come and support their community club. So in terms of that regard, fully, I have no concerns in regards to the actions that they've decided to take this week. At the end of the day, our role and remit is to ensure that the next generation of fans are coming through and so forth and onwards from there.
And are you at liberty to share with us, Tom, why there's been a media blackout for the last week?
Well, Clem definitely made a comment about that on the statement from when they've explained it with the Scott Lindsay piece. I know nothing more than that in regards to what Clem has said. From reading the statement and from my understanding of what was discussed at the advisory board, Clem's been very honest and pretty much said exactly the same as what he said at the advisory board to what he said in the statement. So that's about all I can really say, really. There isn't nothing else to say about it.
Well, we've got another question here from Luke. Luke says, why would Clem provide 100% investment in the ground he only has a 50% stake in? When the club is sold, will he only be able to realise 50% of what had been invested in the stadium?
I don't think it quite works like that. I think what we can say with absolute confidence is that the club's 50% share of the county ground is now, or will be, fingers crossed, with the club. So Swindon Town Football Company Limited, which is like the operating part of holds the EFL share, is the part of the club that will also own 50% of the stadium. So as and when Clem sells the club in years ahead, then when he sells the club, that the club will still hold the share, that 50% share. So if the county ground has greater value, then clearly Clem will be able to realise more money for the club when he sells it. But the but the value and the money that's gone into the stadium, it's likely he'll put more into the stadium than we will as supporters. I mean, we'd love to be a true 50-50 participant, and there'll be more on that in the weeks and months ahead in terms of how we as supporters can play our part. But we don't want to be a bunch of supporters that don't put our hand in our pocket and leave it all to the club to move on the development. We want to play an equal part in that as much as we can. But clearly, the more we build the stadium up and the more the revenue's there and the more successful the place is, then as and when Clem does sell, then he'll realise that value.
We've had a... oh, damn it. I am sorry. We had another question about... Oh, here we go. We just had a tweet from Hank. And Hank asks, if we're able to purchase the ground, are there any ideas to hold concerts and other events again when the season ends to gain revenue for the club and restoration? I guess you've kind of talked about that from an off the pitch point of view, Neil, but obviously things like concerts, etc., they tend to sort of be, we'll all have memories of like Elton John and the party on the pitch. That pretty much takes up the playing surface. So are those conversations all going to be kind of part of the mix? And thank you, Hank, by the way. Good evening to you. Thanks for your question.
I think it's a blank canvas. I mean, there's certainly with the legal meetings that we've had, there's been no discussion about what might and might not happen right now. And I know it's boring to say it. Our focus is 100% on getting the contract signed, and from the trust point of view, running the vote that ends at 10 o'clock on Saturday. A quick advert there: if you've not voted yet, and you've got until 10 o'clock on Saturday. Once we've got the keys and once we've got control of the stadium, then we can get into that kind of stuff. It goes back to what I said earlier. The more the county ground gets used and the more revenue is flowing through the club on a more regular basis, that really is the way of supporting the team on the field. So I'm not sure how successful the concerts were in the past. Certainly I went to the Elton John one. I thought it was fantastic the way it was put on. It'd be great to see more at the county ground, but whether it made the club enough money for the effort they put in, that I don't know.
Joe, you've got the next one?
I do, yeah. I suppose in relation to concerts as well, I'm not sure Marcus Cassidy would be too pleased with too many concerts going on his pitch. But yeah, fingers crossed they come about. So the next question comes from Anonymous. So that's helpful. So it's an anonymous question. It says, who retains the ultimate power of veto in this 50-50 split?
Ultimately, the split in the joint venture is 50-50. There's a number of bits and pieces within the agreement that, in the result of a split vote, that we can escalate if desired. So there's a number of reserved matters that Neil mentioned earlier, which basically don't have the right to go to a vote in a lot of ways, and there's some that do. But the ultimate factor in it, if there is any proposals that do not reach a majority vote, then the next step in that is mediation, in which somebody will come in and be the mediator between the club and the trust to try and find a solution. And if that fails to find a resolution, then basically we look to get an arbitrator in to understand both sides of the argument, and then make a formal decision about the best interest on how to move forward. Now, I know Neil will say, based on his business experience, the moment you start reaching for the contract, you know that you've messed up. And that's ultimately true here. This is meant to be a collaboration, and ultimately the interest in the club, as well as ourselves, is for the best interest of the county ground and the future legacy of supporting it. So there are mechanisms in place to resolve that, but ultimately it's designed to fundamentally drive that collaboration as much as possible, and work together.
I think, Hannes, if I can just add one thing to what Tom said there, everything he said was spot on. The only thing that doesn't ever go to arbitration is if the club try to sell the county ground behind our backs or without our consent. Mm-hmm. If the club wanted to sell the ground and the supporters didn't want to, that would stay deadlocked. And so that's the ultimate protection for the supporters, that in the event that we got an owner who decided to sell the county ground and the supporters said no, there is absolutely nothing that the club could do about it. So that's the one thing that can't go to arbitration and gives the supporters the confidence that the county ground could never be sold under our feet.
Let's be honest, Neil, like that really is the kind of clinching point here, isn't it? Because some of the things that, when we were at the peak of being called Clembots and happy clappers, some of the stuff that was being thrown in our direction was all along the lines of, at one point I was accused of being insidious and leading this insidious kind of march into the fan base of Clem and all of his minions, and this was all going to be about ultimately getting their hands on the prized asset that was the county ground, selling the ground from underneath ourselves and it being replaced by a load of houses. That was kind of pretty much what was being alleged. So we really, from what you're saying, Neil, the devil of the detail in this contract, that is never going to happen. Can we just make that 100% abundantly clear for everybody?
The only way that the county ground can be sold is if 50, I'll get this the right way around, 50% of the membership at the time participated in a vote, and of that 50%, 75% would have to agree to the club, to the county ground being sold. It's a really, really high bar, and it's been set high deliberately. It's possible that it might be in the supporters' interest to sell the county ground one day in, who knows, 100 years' time. Let's say that we get gifted a piece of land out by Junction 15 or something, and we can build a 70,000-seat stadium. Well, that's somewhat different. And at that point, we would have to come to the supporters, and the supporters would have to back it. But if the supporters don't back it to that high bar, there is nothing the club can do to force us to sell the county.
It's incredibly reassuring to hear, Neil, and thank you very much, because just putting my fan hat squarely back on top of my head, that for me is obviously the biggie. Sorry, Tom, before we move on, did you want to pitch in?
No, everything that Neil's just said is absolutely bang on, pinch perfect to what the whole purpose of this is. All right.
Well, we'll bring the debut boy back on, because Chris Kay, you've got the next question, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, mate. I was just wondering what the M4 Junction 15 would look like in 100 years' time, whether there'd be spaceships flying down it or something like that.
It would still have roadworks on it, I expect.
Yeah, you'd still be delayed, and you still not be able to get home. It would still be a nightmare. Listen, guys, the next question comes in from Luke on Twitter. And it's kind of largely around finances, about how to develop the ground. But just to read his question out verbatim, he says, has the trust been advised how Swindon Town Football Club wishes to proceed with the significant town end development, he says, 20 million, without securing this against the ground? So I guess what he's asking is if the ground redevelopment goes ahead, how's the financing for that going to work?
Fundamentally, there's lots of options on the table. In terms of what we could do, as I've said on previous pods and whatnot, there's lots of inspiration out there in terms of what we can draw upon to see what's successful. I've made reference before of Wimbledon, AFC Wimbledon, in terms of how they funded their redevelopment, to even the Hearts Foundation, where they've raised over £14 million. And now a majority owner in their club. That's truly inspirational to us to go out there and achieve. But there is nothing that's off the table, from fans buying a brick to securing money against the county ground. Ultimately, the reassuring thing to stress here is that whatever way this is decided, in terms of the best course of action, the fans will have a say in terms of how that should happen, and a yes or no vote, possibly even consultations, to come in, have and voice their opinion in one way or another, and ultimately, we're only here to ensure that whatever we do generates that return of investment, and without it, then it's something as a fan body, the trust, our purpose, we won't be letting it go ahead without that serious consultation and, you know, being in this safe pair of hands. We're not going to be reckless, and we'll definitely ensure whoever the owner of Swindon Town is not being reckless as well.
Well, please don't do what the next question is asking, which is, my sound trauma has just DM'd me. Good evening, my sound trauma, and they are asking this: could the club move to somewhere like Milton Keynes and the trust be left with 50% of the county ground with no football club to play there?
So this was a question I actually asked Neil the other night, and the answer is no, that's not possible.
Thank you very much. Could you elaborate on that, Neil, why that's not possible?
Yeah, because nobody wants to go to Milton Keynes.
We've already got enough roundabouts here, haven't we? Let's be real.
Now, strangely, in a former life, I used to spend a lot of time at the VW group, and they used to say similar things about Swindon when I used to quip about Milton Keynes. So, yeah, pot and kettle was what they used to say to me. But anyway, we won't get into that. What a godforsaken comparison we're making there. So yeah, but fundamentally, Neil, aside from not wanting to go to Milton Keynes, we wouldn't. I mean, clearly, I can't envisage a day where Swindon Town Football Club would want to up sticks, especially given the size of the town, the lack of kind of geographical competition of, like, you know, another football club that might be eating into our revenue streams. But at the same time, I was very, very close to Wimbledon Football Club when they up sticks. And at one point we're heading to Dublin. So it is, you know, that became a very real concern for a lot of football fans, didn't it, when that happened? So I can understand where the question's coming from.
Yeah, and I think amongst all this kind of positivity around the county ground, we also need to remember that we won't own the club. So that there's certain things we are in control of, and there's certain things that we're not. And again, we just kind of got to bear that in mind, that there's certain football decisions in and around the club that we may not agree with, and we can certainly kind of share our view of it. But just because we're in a joint venture owning the county ground with them doesn't mean that we're going to be able to kind of stop or influence that. So I think the Milton Keynes example is a pretty extreme one, but I think it is a reminder that that this is about owning the county ground, not owning the club. And I think if the opportunity ever arose for the supporters to own the club, then of course that'd be something that would be fantastic. But we're not there yet.
Yeah, as much as the ED Trust have been able to help sort of fund the purchase of a ground, purchasing and then running a football club takes a very, very, very different set of pockets, does it not?
It does, and it's a different concept. I mean, a lot of my family are down in Exeter, and the Exeter Trust obviously have a big say over what happens down there. But it's hard. I can't even imagine how they go about it down there. But that shouldn't stop us dreaming. And if we could bring in the right people with the right financial backing, then who's to say that we couldn't do it? But that's not an option on the table today. So let's focus on the good stuff that we can do, which is getting hold of the county ground, really getting the old thing back on its feet again, and see where the future takes us.
Ellis, you've got the next question, which I think we've kind of answered, but I mean, take it. We'll take another pass on it, Neil, because I think it's one of the things that people don't necessarily always understand in terms of the differences between yourselves, the OSC, and people this week have even been drawing comparisons between Trust STFC and the Sutton Broadbent Lounge. So again, Ellis, if you hit the guys with the question, I think it's probably worth another pass.
Yeah. So can you explain the Trust's organisational / legal status versus OSC or any other organised fan group, and how is this beneficial?
Okay, so Trust STFC is a community society, and there's a piece of legislation that governs registered societies like this, and it's the Cooperative and Community Benefit Societies Act. And what that means is that although the Trust has a board of directors, which is currently 12, the ownership of the society, as it's called, the Trust, the shareholders of it are the members. So every member, and currently we've got 1,070, I think, paying members. We've got lots of others like kind of lifetime members and different thresholds. But we've got 1,070 paying members. Each of those people hold an ownership share in Trust STFC. Even though they're part owners, and hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll own 50% of the county ground in the near future. Doesn't mean that we as a society can release any of that value back to that 1,070 people. Under the law, we have to hold the assets that the trust have, in this case being the county ground, and use them for the benefit of its membership, its shareholders, and the wider community. So let's say we decided to sell off the Stratton Bank. Not that we intend to, but let's say we sold it off. The money that was generated couldn't legally be passed back to the members of the trust. It would have to go back into other projects to do with the county ground or other things that the trust support. So the security there, the safety net, I guess, is that because the trust have that asset lock, which is what it's called, and the OSC and the other kind of supporter groups around us don't. That's the reason why Swindon Borough Council have been negotiating with the trust over this period of time, because they know that once it goes into the trust, it's protected by that asset lock and it can't be used for anything else. Whereas if it went into a supporters group that didn't have the asset lock, then there's always that risk that at some point in the future, that 50% could be sold off and that money distributed to the supporters in that group at the time. So it's a bit of a technical legal answer, but what it comes down to is that the trust is covered by that piece of legislation. The OSC and the other groups aren't, and once it's in there, it's locked in by this asset lock.
Neil, we've had another question here which says, could another club also use the county ground share with that team down the A420? Would members still have to vote on this?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, no, it's an awful question, but it's one I'm going to have to think about. So the joint venture lease the county ground back to the club for 250 years. So it would be down to the club in those circumstances to decide if they wanted to ground share or not. The club wouldn't be leasing the field to anybody else. So I think it would be an operational matter for the club rather than something that the joint venture in itself could get involved with. You'd hope that the club would take into account the views of the supporters quite strongly. But I think from a legal point of view,
I was going to say, we will just clarify right now, live on air, that there won't be a home team wearing yellow taken to the field of the county ground anytime soon.
Tom will be out there blocking the doors.
Yeah, I'll do it for free.
Hey, listen, we've got history. Those dark days of 1990. You know, we will find a way inside that ground. Don't you worry about that. But let's not even tempt fate with the suggestion of it. Right, what have we got for the next question? Chris, I believe you're up next, pal. Or is it? Sorry, it's you, is it not, Ellis?
No, Ellis just asked that one.
Oh, sorry, Ellis. It's your one, mate.
This one again is coming from anonymous, so I'll fire away anyway. I've been a town fan for over 35 years and do not believe in being a member of the trust or the OSC. I've been to Wembley 4 times, buy all club merch, have season tickets for my family, and I'm not sure how many paying members you have, which I've obviously already mentioned. But should you not be opening this up to a more public vote? Surely season ticket members pay significantly more per annum than a member of the trust. Are you merely preaching to the converted?
Good point.
So I think it's, as Neil's already explained, the trust is basically a legal structure in terms of its formation and its purpose under, the Society Acts that we form under. The arrangement of which we are entering is a legally binding arrangement of which we need to gain permission from the shareholders, e.g. our members, to be able to enter that arrangement. of course, we'd love to open it up to the supporters to have that say and have that opinion. But from a legally structured foundational perspective, the only votes that matter are the shareholders of the organisation. So as much as it's disappointing to hear that the anonymous questioner doesn't see the value in the trust, I hope from the conversations that is being discussed tonight and explained that the value is there realised. You know, the only way really that a trust functions is being that representative body of the fan base, and without the fans being members of that trust, similar to like a trade union in some ways, without that united voice behind a legally structured organisation, there is fundamentally no point to our existence, no relevance to our existence. And the trust is that legally registered foundational organisation in which those voices come together to be united, to stand together and protect the county ground, protect the club for as long as we are here. So I sincerely hope that the person asking the question does consider joining the trust, because ultimately through the trust is the only way that we can guarantee the safety and the security of the county ground, with all of our activities in which we are, you know, asking our members to vote and support.
I mean, Tom, it's a very interesting point that's been raised there, though, isn't it, about the importance of season ticket holders? And one of the things that I just immediately thought hearing that question is, it'll probably make an awful lot of sense, especially now you're talking about shares in the ground and things like this, the season ticket purchases next year, especially where you're working in as a joint venture with the football club. It'd make an awful lot of sense for season ticket holders to have the option to maybe have trust membership rolled into that, if the importance of being part of those votes is obviously valid to them.
Yeah, no, it is a fair point. And, you know, we can only but encourage people to come and join us and share the value proposition of and the reason of why we exist. Ultimately, people have that choice. Now, whether that's rolled into a single transaction with a season ticket or not, ultimately, we can't hoodwink everybody into being a member of the trust, unfortunately. It does come down to personal opinion and a personal choice. So, you know, all I can say is come and get involved with the trust. It is something that is a representative body of the voice of the fans at the point of the joint venture, at the point of the advisory board, and just a bodied representation of our fan supporter base. So yeah, come and get involved. If you've got any questions about what it is that we actually get up to on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis, season basis, annual basis, then by all means, we're fully open, transparent, love the conversation, would love to engage with as many fans as possible, and explain why and what we do. And yeah, hope that people join us.
Jason, you're up next, pal.
This is a spicy question. I think Anonymous has been very busy tonight. They ask, why has the trust seen a drop-off in trust membership? Surely this highlights a lack of faith in the trust.
I don't think we've seen any drop-off in trust membership. You know, the trust was significantly lower, and I think even before really we stood up to he who shall not be named, we were offering or hovering somewhere around about 300-400 members, if I'm not mistaken. And then since the Fan Power No to Lee Power campaign kicked off and significantly gained traction and energy and a voice, which ultimately proved in a conclusion of great success. You know, our membership trebled and quadrupled, and we can only hope that with the county ground as well becoming an asset in which the fans can be engaged on and get involved with in many shapes and forms. You know, the plans that we are looking at is obviously there are going to be fans that want to be part of the trust and want to have a say in it. but we are looking at ways and opportunities of how fans can get involved outside of the trust and help raise money for the purpose of the joint venture as well. But I won't say any more on that, because that will be going into territory that we're not quite prepared on yet. And, you know, we're just concentrate on the vote. But fundamentally, just come and get involved, really, in lots of other ways.
Mark via DM, gentlemen, is saying, I am not a politician. I just want to know the ground and the club will be in the best hands moving forward. Please give me 3 reasons why this is the case with you guys.
So, at the risk of going over old ground, I think the first one is that it kind of governs who owns the ground and where it can end up in the future. So, we've not talked about this in length, but one of the rule changes in the trust is that one of the decisions, I guess you could call it, that would have to come to the membership is if the club wanted to sell their shareholding in the county ground. And that's a reserved matter that would come through for approval. So I think the first thing is all about ground security. If we leave it with Swindon Borough Council, who's to say they don't get an offer for, I don't know, X million in 5 years' time, and they decide to sell it on to somebody we have no relationship with and may not be in the supporters' favour. So number one is about getting the ground under control. The second thing is about working with the club to improve the facilities for the supporters, match day experience, repair the place, deal with what they call dilapidations, all the things that haven't been dealt with for so long. And then the third thing is about some exciting redevelopments, better stands, potentially a hotel, start getting some revenue through the county ground the week, not just on a Saturday afternoon. And ultimately, that's for me what this is about. I want to see some fantastic players. I want to see some great managers. I want to see us back up in the championship. And you can only do that if you've got a good business plan with some money flowing and a stadium to support it. So for me, they're the 3 things. I mean, Tom, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I would just one up you really and say that the limit to our aspirations is not the Championship, it's the Premier League, the Champions League, the FIFA Club World Cup. Come on, Neil, be a bit more ambitious.
Tom's chartering a plane out to the Middle East. Let's do that.
You can tell I've been following town longer than Thomas.
No, but listen, they really were halcyon days, weren't they? I mean, we can all conjure up the image of Glenn Hoddle and John Gorman outside the main entrance with the red and white brolly, and I mean, it's starting to feel like a long time ago now, isn't it? Where that back then, if I knew then what I know now, how much more would we have all made of those times? So I think it's only right and proper that certainly in the first instance, whilst I admire the notion of getting onto a plane with Tom and going out to the Middle East, that I would just like to get back to a stage where we are attracting marquee, like to just quote you directly, Neil, marquee managers, marquee players. It's been too long, and wouldn't it be lovely if we're not just polishing up the gems and then pass them on to other people, but we're actually growing our own gems, and actually they want to stay at our club as well. I think that would be a really, really interesting mark of progression. Joe, you've got the next question, buddy.
I have indeed, yeah. So I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of this word, but I'm going to go with overage. It sounds unlikely, but can you elaborate for us?
Neil, that's a legal boring question. I'll leave that to you, mate.
First of all, did I say it correctly?
No, but it was really funny though.
Overage.
Overage is what we're talking about. Overage is a really boring technical term. So this goes back to the fact that the stadium is currently owned by Swindon Borough Council, and clearly they have a responsibility to the taxpayers of Swindon to make sure that they get a fair price for the ground. So we've had it independently valued between the Trust, the club and Swindon Borough Council. We've agreed that the fair market price today is 2.3 million. If in the future we do something outside of the kind of the stadium's kind of normal use, that generates or has the potential to generate a lot more money, then it's not unreasonable for the council to go, well, hang on a second, we sold you this thing at a fair price. If it's now worth a lot more money, then actually you need to make a contribution back to us, because that's representing the taxpayers of Swindon. And the council taxpayers would be a bit unhappy, certainly the non-Swindon Town supporting ones, if they felt that the council had given the stadium away on the cheap. So overage is a legal term that basically says that if the value of the land increases significantly in the future through something unrelated to the use of the land as a stadium, then we would then have to make a contribution back to Swindon Borough Council on top of the 2.3 million. But the likelihood is that would only happen if we've developed something that has created value in itself. So effectively, the payment, that overage payment, would come out of whatever it is we've just built or what we've just done. So it's a safety net for the council. It's quite a common thing in these kind of situations. It's not something we envisage falling over anytime soon. But if we did, it would be because we've done something good that's created a lot more value.
Mm.
The other thing just to add on to that, though, is that the overage payment would only be triggered by the party that commences on said development. So if we went off and built the hotel, then the trust would be liable for that. If the club did it, then the club would be liable for that overage payment. There was another point, but I've completely let it slip.
Well, no, Tom, listen, let me jump in. I mean, I've got a question off the back of this overage. So clearly, they're already sort of, you know, I wouldn't necessarily want to call them architectural drawings, but we've seen plans with a, you know, what looked like a rather large-looking town end sort of drawn up, which quite clearly had what looked like a hotel sort of built within. I mean, does that immediately constitute overage, I guess? Because we're talking about, you know, a hotel. I mean, for my understanding was one of the immediate redevelopments of the town end included a hotel. So surely that's going to immediately increase the value and immediately trigger overage, right?
Fundamentally, the aspects that contribute to an overage would be the likes of a hotel or residential development. That, in my understanding of the legal technical documentation, and Neil's a lot more closer to it than I, that is what would contribute to the overage. I've also just remembered the other bit that I wanted to say in terms of the overage payments. That would be constituted as a trigger payment 10 years after the completion of the development, or when the development was sold. Whichever basically comes first. So there's a bit of a time period on that overage in which the liability would basically be due to be paid to the council. But Neil, I don't know if you've got anything else you wanted to add to that.
I think the only other thing I'd add here is that we are still haggling a little bit over the terms of the overage. So all of that isn't actually set in stone yet. But the general concept is there, that if we were to go and get planning permission for something like, I don't know, it's never going to happen. Let's say we built a 100-story block of flats in the car park. Yeah, that clearly sits outside the realms of a football stadium. All of a sudden, that land value would have increased, and we'd have to. That would definitely trigger overage back to the council. So it's that kind of stuff that falls outside the typical use of the stadium.
So very, very different to Overage, which is a subsection of contract.
Can I just say, I went onto the Collins Dictionary website and used the voice pronunciation tool whilst I was sat there waiting to read my question out, and it said overage. And I read the definition, and I'm making a complaint to Collins.
Well, so good, because overage is in the subsection of the contract that just has 2 stars, and both Mark and Neil's names are next to them. So thank you for raising, Joe. Chris, I think this question's already been addressed, but I think there's something of an extension to it should we wish to find, if you want to pose your question, pal.
Yeah, I can extend it, shall we say? But I'll just, if it's any consolation, I actually thought Overage was something to do with the cricket club next door. So you know, we're all kind of confused by that one. So thanks for the explanation. The question is another one that's coming from our favourite correspondent Anon, but he asks: is there a priority area for development in and around the county ground? And I'm going to kind of slightly extend that one and say the first kind of week that you get the keys, so to speak, what's the first thing you're going to go in and do, and what's the sort of long term thing that you want to achieve?
I don't know about you, Neil, but I'm definitely going to be having a stiff drink because it's been a marathon. Eh?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should probably just take that opportunity to recognise that both Tom and I are relatively new to the board, as we were saying earlier. Steve Myton particularly has been at this for nearly 8 years. He's the chairman of the trust board. They're the kind of the likes of James Mayton and Greg, who've been providing their legal support free of charge over the last few years as well. There's a lot of unsung heroes that are making that happen, and clearly with a similar number of people from the club as well. So although this week it's been James, Tom and myself out front and centre doing this type of stuff, it's been a huge team effort. And I think Tom's probably bang on the money. The day that we get the keys, we should all go for a beer.
Yeah, well-deserved party. Well-deserved party, I think.
Yeah. Well, we'll have 50% of the Legends Lounge we can go and use.
Which half are you going to use, though?
Definitely the
one with the bar.
They've stuck a bar at both ends now, guys, just to cover both bases.
We're okay.
Guys, Craggers has dropped us a line. Just wanted to say thank you for reading his question and for the overall welcoming and inclusive atmosphere here on this show. Yeah, thank you, Neil and Tom. Said at the start, it's kind of important that all these questions are being read out as they're coming in, as well as obviously all the ones that have been fielded so far. And thanks for. I mean, it's. I guess one of the biggest problems when you start talking about contracts and legalities and things. Sometimes those conversations can become quite adversarial, can't they? And I think what's lovely about this evening is and it's testament to the questions that you've probably answered on the other pods. I mentioned obviously that what you did with Vic and the official supporters club, what you did with Rich and Low Strangers. You answered an awful lot of questions in an awful lot of detail. You're doing the same tonight, and I guess in being so transparent, it kind of removes any kind of adversarial nature to it. So thank you for observing that, Craggers. Ellis, you've got the next question, pal.
Yeah. This is another one in from Anonymous. Are there any plans for marking the legacy provided by the late Nigel Eady and his trust?
Yeah, I think it's easy to say without a shadow of a doubt, as we've already mentioned tonight, there's a significant contribution made by Nigel. And there's no concrete plans in terms of how we plan to do that, but make no mistake, it's not something that will be brushed under the carpet. There's still conversations to be had to best decide what is fitting. I know that the Community Foundation has announced their plans of how they plan to recognise Nigel and his significant contribution to the Community Foundation as well. And make no mistakes, we will be doing something. I just can't tell you what at this point. As an answer to the other questions, until we get the keys to the county ground, then really, and the ink is dry on that contract. They're merely ideas at this point in time. Obviously, we want to do it fitting and we want to make it right. It's a huge moment, and we definitely want to recognise that.
Well, as a suggestion, as somebody that very much enjoyed the way that West Ham called time on Upton Park. Just a suggestion, guys. Just consider how many players Nigel would have witnessed during his lifetime, and maybe consider an invite to the county ground and a little bit of a what's the best word for it? almost like a reopening of the county ground, if you will, but under new stewardship. And I'm sure a few VIP invites like that wouldn't go amiss. Because one of the things that I don't think our club does particularly well at is looking after its relationships with its club legends. I appreciate we've got the plaque up in the county ground, but I genuinely believe that we could do so much more with players of yesteryear and make so much more of their contributions to the club. And I know that Steps have almost immediately, one of the first things that Clem did when he joined the club, of course, was to make Don Rogers honorary life president. I think it's only right and proper that, you know, some of those other relationships are maybe restored is a bit over dramatic, but made the most of. Anyway, there's a little starter for 10. Chris, you've got the next one, pal.
Yeah, in this one, Anonymous has changed his age and has become younger. Is there any chance the club might sell and move from the county ground in my lifetime? I'm in my 20s. I can imagine a new stadium development could be a cheaper alternative to retrofitting the current ground. What prevents this, and who would make this decision?
So within the agreement of the joint venture, for the club to end their arrangement in the lease, that has to be agreed by on our side, so the supporters will be able to have that say. And ultimately, you know, the other thing to stress here really is that the ground is not owned by Clem or the owner. The ground is an asset, or their half in the share in the county ground is an asset to the club. So regardless of who owns Swindon Town, the county ground will forever stay part of the club. And there's reserved matters to ensure that as well. So there's lots of protections there to give comfort to. Neil, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add on to that.
Well, I think the biggest comfort to take, it's a 250-year lease. So that's the club are making by signing with the joint venture. It came and said that we want to move stadiums to Junction 15 because of, like I say, we've just outgrown the county ground, and that would be in the supporters' benefit. Then, of course, we would consider that, and we would come and talk to the membership. But look, there's been plenty of projects and ideas about moving away from the county ground. I think all concerned have taken the view that it's our spiritual home. The likelihood of moving away from the county ground is probably the smallest it's been for a long time. And if we're ever going to do it, now's the time to do it. So I think once we start that redevelopment work, it'll kind of concrete our place at the county ground, and it would take something fairly significant to move us away from that. But never say never. I mean, if we get to that Champions League spot that Tom wants us to get, then we'll need a 70,000 seat stadium, and it's not likely we're going to fit that in the car park. So never say never.
If we get, or when we get there.
Sorry, when, not if, Tom.
When. Yeah.
I mean, also, we do need to consider that, you know, as more and more, you know, sort of American money and deep pockets sort of like wash into the English game. You know, Clem's not a fool, and there may well be a very wealthy, you know, American investor that might like the look of a former Premier League club that lives at the heart of a community of 300,000 people, surrounded by a bunch of blue chip companies. You know, especially with the ground in the situation it's at now, we are so much more saleable, and as we all know, the American flamboyance for their sports stadia, it's probably it could be. I mean, it turns around a lot quicker under different ownership. So yeah, I guess that's the thing. It's like not for now, Neil, I guess is what we're saying. But like you said, never say never. What's we've got we're edging towards the end now, guys. You'll be pleased to know. But Jason's got the next question for us.
Yeah, you may have touched on this earlier on. Anon asks, what is the possibility the ground could be wholly owned by the fans? Is that a possibility further down the line?
I personally would say never on that. But at the moment, I think from my perspective, we would need to buy the whole club to acquire that. I don't think any business-minded owner of the club would give up their assets without significant money for it, and the trust would be in the prime position to acquire the 100% rights to it. I think it would be a little bit difficult overall in the reality of where we are, but let's not make any mistakes about it. You know, there's been conversations I've witnessed on social this week about having a 51% ownership in the county ground to give us a greater protection. But ultimately, the way that the joint venture is being constructed and pulled together and negotiated, it gives us so much protection, more so than what we've ever seen to date as a fan of our club. And I think that's a great start to then build onto whatever may come next. Who knows what may happen? But fundamentally, as a fan base, we have a part ownership in a viable asset that is so important to our club. And yeah, never say never.
Tom, one of the questions that's come in, that's along, you mentioned about protection and whatnot. This is kind of in that ballpark. It's our friend Anon again, who says, why is this not a freehold? Ultimately, Swindon Borough Council are on a win-win here, no? Appreciate it's 250 years, but the principle still stands.
No, the joint venture will own the freehold in the ground. The lease is between the joint venture and the club for 250 years. So we, as a fan base, will own 50% of that freehold, and the club will own the other 50% of that freehold. And the 250-year lease is between the joint venture and the club.
And the world's going to look a very different place in 250 years. So let's.
Well, yeah, God knows what I'll look like. That's a sure fact.
Hopefully, we'll all be together somewhere on some patch of land overlooking the county ground, and that's a whole different conversation. Joe, you've got the next question, pal.
I do, yeah. So, again, our mate Anonymous, rent discount. I understand this is 50%. Is the rent based on the current figure paid to SBC, or is it being increased or reduced prior to the discount? Who's setting this figure?
So the rent being paid is variable. It's based on a fair market rent. So as the market goes up and down, then the rent can go up and down. And we've agreed a 50% discount in whatever the fair market rent is for the county ground at any particular time. We still get 50% of the rent into the joint venture, which then, as I said earlier, goes back into the repairs and dilapidations of the stadium. But just as important, the club get a 50% discount, and they can put that money to other uses. At the moment, 100% of the rent that the club pay goes to Swindon Borough Council, and so it's a pure expense, an outgoing expense. Moving forward, what they're paying 50% of it, they're paying 50% less, and what does get paid goes back into the stadium. So it's good for the supporters and it's good for the club, and it gets additional revenue into things like the playing budget.
I mean, that's quite significant, isn't it? If you think about the playing budgets that are set in pre-season and the expenses that are taken into account. I mean, I haven't got figures in front of me. I'm not too sure of what the rent looks like currently, but you'd imagine that the rent we're paying is probably a fairly competitive budget for League Two in terms of a playing budget in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, if you take in comparison to a residential property, you know, if you're renting, the argument is that it's, I use inverted commas here, money out the window. Whereas if you own the house, then you are owning an asset and you're investing in that asset. And it's the same principle of what we're talking about here with the rent that would be paid to the joint venture. It's being invested as a guarantee back into the stadium, back into the asset to maintain it, to increase its value and maintain its structural purpose. So yeah, it's a significant difference and a significant value to us as a club, as well as the fan base.
You're being asked directly here by MST to tell us exactly what the rent is. Are you at liberty to share that, Tom?
I don't have a clue how much that is actually. Neil, I don't know if you know.
I do. I don't think we've put that into the public domain. We've got a list of stuff that we've agreed with the council and with the club that we can put out publicly. It is one of the things that there will be times in this process and in the entire ownership of the county ground that we are tied to some confidentiality and non-disclosure clauses because of the kind of the commercial nature of some of the things that we'll be doing. For example, if we're talking to developers about stadium costs, it wouldn't be good if we kind of that information was out in the public domain while we're in the middle of a competitive process. So there will be some stuff we're unable to talk about, and actually putting the kind of the hard-coded rent out there is something that we're not in a position to do right now.
I'm guessing, Neil, if people really wanted to know, the accounts get published, right? So, you know, further down the line, you're going to be able to find that kind of information out if you want to dig deep enough for it.
Yeah, I think that's fair, Hannes. I just think we need to respect the fact at the moment we're in closing mode. We've got a few weeks now. We've got a few days left of the vote. We've then got 2 to 3 weeks to get this closed out by the end of January. We need to keep everybody on board, and we need to play fair and by the rules. So I'd ask that those listening tonight kind of respect the fact that there's going to be some stuff that we can't talk about, not because there's anything underhand going on, but this is a commercial operation, and we're not going to be able to talk about absolutely everything, even though we'd like to.
Yeah, that's fair enough, Neil. Chris Kay, you've got the next question. Cool, this is a good one.
Yeah, it is a good one. And another one from Mrs. A. Non this time. Would Trust STFC consider hosting a, in quote marks, general election concerning its leadership moving forward? Given they'll be controlling an asset all Swindon Town fans are wholly invested in, not sure on the positions within the trust, but would be interested in ensuring those individuals are vetted and democratically selected by the fan base.
So
they are.
We definitely are. Like myself and Neil have gone through that process last year, and we got democratically elected at the AGM, which was held in March. All of the board members, will basically go through an election at least at some point. The next round of elections are going to be commenced in March. So details on all of that and AGMs will be announced shortly. So if you are interested in standing to be on the board for the trust, then that is certainly a possibility. The other thing as well, just to say, is that we do have roles in which you can apply to be a officer of the trust. So that's so much as somebody who's able to come along to the board members and be part of the discussions and the monthly board meetings, but ultimately doesn't have a vote on these matters. But they can certainly be there to be part of that conversation at a minimum. And in terms of who leaders are within the trust, we select a leader out of those that are nominated and successfully elected to the board. Just like those that will be elected to go on to the joint venture will be elected by those that sit on the board and voted for by the trust board members.
Makes perfect sense. Chris, are you happy with that, pal?
Absolutely. I'm just slightly wary that we don't want to keep our two chaps too late here. So I'm marching through the questions.
So we've got our second to last question for you here, guys, and it's from Ellis. Ellis, the floor is yours.
Okay. In the event of a cash windfall for the club or possible new investment or ownership, where does that money sit? Club or CGJV? God, that's a mouthful. Could the club or anyone else purchase the CGJV as an entity?
Right, there's about 5 questions wrapped up in that, I think.
Yeah.
So I'll do them as quick as I can. Could anybody else buy the county ground joint venture? So 50% of the county ground joint venture will be owned by the trust, and that's covered by the asset lock. So I think it's pretty unlikely that the trust membership would ever vote to kind of sell off the 50% share in the joint venture, it would raise a lot of money, but that money would have to go back into trust activities. We wouldn't be able to kind of divvy it up between all of the members. So I think that's pretty unlikely. In terms of cash windfalls, it depends where it comes from. If there is another Nigel Eady situation, for example, then clearly that money could be invested in through the county ground joint venture to benefit the county ground, or that money may be left to the club directly. So it's one of those that it really does depend on the circumstances. I think that covers it. Have I missed anything there?
No, I think you've pretty much aced it there, Neil. Jason, you've got the penultimate question for the gentleman.
Indeed, I have. So the question Anonymous asked, and hopefully this is one of the last questions from Anonymous for the evening. Is the county ground listed, and are there any major issues preventing or restricting development which could discourage investment?
Oh, that's a cracking question. I don't believe there is anything listed per se. I know that the county ground through the trust, we basically campaign for it to be a community asset. So that I believe I'm correct in that. I am quoting off the top of my head without any factual basis. But I do not believe there's anything that is listed within the county ground, but I do believe there's a community asset lock on the ground to give it some protection. Neil, you'll probably have a better idea than myself, though.
I think the Stratton Bank toilets were built by the Romans and probably are old enough to be listed. But no, I don't think anything is listed. I think the only other thing I'd add is that any development we do at the stadium would go through the normal planning consent process. So even though the Swindon Borough Council are agreeing to sell us the stadium and they know we're going to redevelop it, that doesn't mean we can short circuit the planning process. So any stadium development, anything major would go through the planning application in the usual way.
And I guess, I mean, it still doesn't feel that long ago, although it really is a long time ago now, that what was the green corrugated iron Striven Road stand, what actually then almost in the space of a summer became what we've got now as the Don Rogers. So if that can happen, there's no reason why other similar kind of builds can happen under the right ownership, with the right investment and so on and such like. It's not like we should be. I think I get the gist of that question, but I think we've already done one of the stands. There's no reason why we couldn't attack the other three at some point, guys. The last question is actually. It's mine to ask you, but it is actually from Anonymous. And they said to say, tell me in under a minute, each of you, tell me in under a minute why I should vote yes to the county ground joint venture proposals.
Go on, Neil, you first.
Oh, you beat me to it. Okay, why should they vote yes to the joint venture proposals? I'm going to play on your heartstrings. My first game was as an 8-year-old. I can't remember which game it was. I remember sitting in the north stand, enjoying the experience, listening to the chanting, not really understanding what was going on. But it got in my blood enough that I had a season ticket from probably about the age of 12. I turned 50 last year, and I've had a season ticket probably ever since. My son was I think he was a season ticket holder at 3 days old. My dad had just died, and we transferred the ticket into his name on the way home from the registry office. And he's been a season ticket holder ever since, along with my wife. This is a 250-year deal. When my time is done here, I want to be able to look back and say that we protected that county ground and we've passed it on for the generations ahead. I can't think of any better reason why we should be buying the ground.
And you know what, Neil? For every little quirk or every little piece of contractual information that needs to be understood and fine-tooth combed, I think your average fan that's going to sit there on a Saturday or a Tuesday night is going to put as much stock in the answer you've just given as they will any legal debate. Coming from a fellow Swindon Town fan, I'm loving that. And you come in under your time limit as well. Fair play to you, pal. An experienced campaigner. Go on, Tom. Tom, your minute starts now.
So the county ground was built in 1890. So it's been in existence for more than 130 years. The club has been home for a vast majority of that, if not all of it. I can't quite remember exactly when we moved in. But at the end of the day, it's been our home for as long as anyone can remember, or any historians can really tell us. It's something that when you actually stand on a football ground, no matter where you are, whichever ground you go to, your home ground is your second home. You stand in the Town End, you sit in the Don Rogers, you sit in the Arkles, even at times you sit in the open, cold and wind and rain on the Stratton Bank. No matter what happens, when that Red Army chant in the Town End goes up, or that "Give me an S," those chants are our chants at our ground, which is our fortress, in which no one else can deny. Now, we've got an opportunity to make that forever home that nobody can remove us from, that nobody can destroy, nobody can take away from us. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that has never happened in our existence. And when you really think about the next 250 years, where will we be? This is a moment in history that ultimately I want all the fans to look back at in 100, 200, 250 years and say, wow, those guys, those fans at that point in time made a difference. And I think that's really important, just to take stock of how important this vote is. And the moment is right here in front of us. And I don't think future generations would ever forgive us if we let this pass us by.
Well, Tom,
you've
had 2 minutes, but I wanted to give you the 2 because you've been so bloody eloquent. Can I just round off, gentlemen, by quoting John Saunders, who's just tweeted, "Hello, John, good evening to you." And John says, "Can I just say how impressed I've been this week with the members of the Trust Board, how well Neil and Tom have answered questions this week. And also, it would be remiss of me, I know Alex is listening in. Alex has obviously spoken to the BBC and Sam Parkin today, or not today. Well, the show went out today. And there has been other activity from other Trust members as well that's gone out, that has been appreciated. It's been illuminating. I think my thanks to not just Neil and Tom for coming on tonight and being so open and willing and transparent. And I can assure you, as sure as eggs is eggs, and I'll give you any assurances that you may require, that no conversation has taken place with Tom or Neil where questions have been knocked off, or those questions have been asked as they've been rolling in, as I'm sure the people that have tweeted will testify. As soon as they've arrived in my inbox, I've been asking those questions, unless your name is Anon, of course. And even then, Mr. or Mrs. Anon, we've asked all of your questions that you've sent in because they were all so bloody good. But I think, judging by some of those questions, they definitely come from different people. But anyway, by the by, I mean, listen, on behalf of my panel, just in the interest of time, Tom, Neil, you are, of course, we've got a bit of any other business to do. You are more than welcome to hang around as speakers, as listeners, or indeed, if you've got work tomorrow, you're more than welcome to disappear off. Thank you ever so much, and good luck with the vote. We hope ultimately you get the right answers, and very much look forward to standing in the Legends Lounge and having that Guinness at your end of the Legends, which you'll be paying.
No, well, look, thanks for having us, Hannah. It's been a great evening. As I say, we've got 3 days left to go on the vote, so fingers crossed for a good outcome. And I look forward to that Guinness with you.
Sounds good to me. Thanks ever so much, Tom.
I'm going to stick around because I want to definitely get dibs on saying Charlie Austin hat-trick this weekend.
You're more than welcome. Neil, we'll catch up with you very, very soon. It's been an absolute pleasure. Well, there you are, dear listener. That was Neil Hutchings and Tom Parrish from Trust STFC. I think across all the various media outlets, like I said, if we haven't answered your questions, or the questions that were asked tonight weren't quite to your tastes, then I would direct you to any of the good podcast platforms, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're not downloading Rich Pullen's Low Strangers, then give your head a wobble and get downloading. Their pod this week with the Trust has been exceptional, and there's a real deep dive into a lot of the contractual matters. And again, no quarter asked or given. in relation to the trust. And if that doesn't satisfy you, then make your way onto YouTube and subscribe to the Official Supporters Club and their weekly pod, where Vic not only speaks to the great and good of Swindon Town, but this week obviously has been speaking to the trust. And you can see those questions being put to them, and you can almost look them in the eye while they're answering them as well. Such is the video nature of Vic and the Official Supporters Club's endeavours. So get out there, get downloading. Again, you've never had it so good in the wonderful world of Swindon Town content. Well, listen, elsewhere, it's been a very, very, very busy week as we're all completely knackered. And I think Joe and I are certainly bordering on getting tonsillitis. So run down are we. But Swindon Town Women unfortunately suffered defeat on Sunday, going down 5-2 away at Southampton. And there very, very interesting feedback that I've had when I've gone digging around that fixture. It isn't quite as it seems. So the women trialled a new 4-4-2 formation with Annie Colston and Helena Diaz-Butcher occupying very, very wide positions in what was kind of like the first professional outing of that formation this season. And for large stretches of the game, the formation was seen to work very, very well, but it was something that was new to the girls, and they've been caught on the break a few times. The scoreline apparently very much flattered Southampton, and in the second half the game was very, very, very close. There's a lot of confidence in and around Swindon Town Women that in the return fixture, hopefully back at the county ground given the magnitude of Southampton, that there will be a reversal of that scoreline, and the vibe coming off the pitch was pretty good amongst the players. There wasn't all heads down. There was much to be positive about. None less than debuts for Hannah in midfield, and a new goalkeeper, Eve, who Swindon Town Women have signed from Reading, her first ever senior game. So credit and kudos to our new goalkeeper, of course, coming in for the injured Emily McGrogan. You'll recall from our alternative commentary of Swindon Town Women versus Plymouth Argyle Women a few weeks back at the county ground, where Emily picked up a fairly nasty knee injury. Goal scorers on Sunday were Annie Colston back amongst the goals, as you well know, sponsored by the Sir Tom Broadbent Lounge. Congratulations, Annie, who was assisted by Nat Goodright, and Meg Attenborough was amongst the goals as well, who was assisted by Gypsy Vivash from a free kick. So we keep our fingers crossed for you, ladies, and we'll hold you to that reverse scoreline in the return fixture. Panel, I'm guessing none of you guys made your way down to Southampton for this game?
No, I didn't. I saw that Kelly Paul went down to the game, which is a great effort from Kelly. And Casey making her way out with captain and team. You know, that's fantastic to see a young Swindon Town fan going out all the way down to Southampton, walking out with the team as a mascot in a women's fixture. It was really nice to see that on socials.
Yeah, really, really nice. And congratulations, Casey. We hope you enjoyed your big day. Casey becoming quite the celebrity in these parts, and quite a future that young lady's going to have as a celebrity fan, with quite a legacy that she's establishing. I tell you what, I would like to know the value of Casey's autograph book. I'll tell you that for nothing. But yeah, as we say, we're going to hold you to that, ladies, in the reverse fixture. Now, Joe, whilst you're on talking, we've had a busy week. So for those of you that haven't been watching, last Sunday I was sat on the sofa, and it became apparent that a shirt collector that's very close to all of our interests was exploring the notion of letting go to a professionally framed football shirt. That football shirt, of course, was from May the 17th, 2010, and that football shirt was worn by a certain Stephen Darby, who scored the winning penalty that took Swindon Town to Wembley and saw us defeat Charlton away from home in, to quote Andrew Hawes, one of the most wild Swindon Town games of modern times. Well, I'm delighted to say that the shirt has made its way back to Stephen Darby. We turned around what has been quite the campaign. So in the space of 60 minutes, my fellow intrepid Sir Tom Broadbent loungers and I managed to roll out a campaign that we would have probably preferred a week minimum, but at least a month to plan. But we've turned a campaign around in no less than 60 minutes. I think at last count, we're about 600 quid to the good, which means that we're getting there, covering the costs on securing the shirt in the first place. But the most important thing is the shirt is back with Stephen and Steph Houghton, of course, his wife, former Lionesses captain. The shirt was hand-delivered by the Sir Tom Broadbent Lounge to the Etihad Stadium, and we have photographic evidence that the shirt is back with Steph and Stephen. And the only reason we've not posted that is we have been politely asked not to, given the sensitivities, because really it's for Steph and Stephen when they're ready to post something, and I am fully supportive of that message. But please don't think that's where your interest in this shirt should end, because the story has got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, as well as appearing right across local and regional BBC. We're soon going to be taking the story onto ITV. There are conversations afoot with Sky Sports. We are on a myriad fan podcasts and shirt collecting podcasts over the course of the next couple of weeks. Stephen's former clubs, Joe, do you want to say a little bit about this?
Yeah, so, I mean, as Hans has said there, I think this week has been the most manic, insane week of any of my life, really. I think my phone book and my contact list has just blown up to the point where it's now a bit of a brag. I've had discussions with Bradford, Bolton, Liverpool today, Rochdale proving the hardest to find, but I'm doing my best to get hold of Rochdale. Essentially, all of Stephen's former clubs, we want to get involved with promotion of the fundraiser. Again, I think we want to, as well as the fundraiser and raising money for Derby Rimmer, we want to get our hands on and get back to Stephen some of the memorabilia from his career. So any match-worn shirts from his time at Bolton, Rochdale, Bradford, Swindon, Liverpool, as much of his match-worn career from his match-worn shirts, from his career, you know, we'll try our best to get our hands on them. There were discussions actually today with Bradford, who we were in discussions with getting his 2013 League Cup final shirt. Bradford had agreed to that. They'd said they're willing to donate it. At Bradford Stadium, they have a 2013 suite of the League Cup final dedicated to the players that made that historic moment in their history happen. Every match-worn shirt from that game is on the wall, framed, with the pictures of the players in the final Wembley against Swansea. Now, they said to us they were happy to give us that shirt. I believe, I was told by Bradford's director of ops that it was put back to Stephen, and Stephen himself has said that he would rather that shirt hang on the wall with his teammates from that day and from that season, which I think says a lot about the bloke.
A guy. What?
Yeah. Incredible. I mean, this is just... It says a lot about how football fans across the UK, not only the former clubs of Stephen Darby, how we feel about him, the support that we've had, but also the support for his teammates and fellow professionals that Stephen has and has displayed in his decisions and his gratitude that he's shown us. It's been incredible. It's been really heartwarming. It's just been sensational. I mean, I've just before coming on the show as well, I've had discussions with TalkSport. So I'm hoping that tomorrow TalkSport will be helping us out with this as well. It's been really heartwarming to see the love that's come through for Stephen and his family, and we know for a fact that they're really, really gracious and really happy to be receiving this love and support.
Guys, I'm just going to cut in here. What you guys have done this week, amongst all of the noise that's been going on this week, largely from the trust and obviously the absence of anything being mentioned by other parties, to take this opportunity and to do what you've done, to get the shirt that's such a precious memory to any footballer, but in particular to Stephen and his family. It's been incredible, especially on the short turnaround time, just to be completely agile and straight off the back of it. You may want to give your fundraising page a bit of a refresh, but from us in the trust, we're fully behind you every step of the way on this.
Oh,
Tom, I've just refreshed the GoFundMe page and I'm in shock. That's thank you very much.
Not a problem.
oh my God. Wow. Tom, thank you, mate. Listen, look, all I'm going to say is this: like Joe and I spoke about this morning, and I mean, Joe, it's fair to say, I said to Joe, like, I'm absolutely exhausted. But I think one of the reasons why we're all so bloody knackered is that there may be sort of 20 of us that that help sort of put the Sir Tom Broadbent Lounge together and get it out there, but every single one of those people does what they do absolutely from the heart, which is one of the reasons why you hear me get so defensive when we start being accused of being insidious or happy clappers or, clembots, or call it whatever you will. All I'll say is this, that, every single one of those individuals is just a bona fide Swindon Town fan, whether that you've been with the show like Chris Kay, you've been with the show like literally a week, or, whether you're like myself or Joe, that have been with the show a hell of a lot longer than that. But we're all just fundamentally all Swindon Town fans. We stand there in the stadium alongside those people that throw all that kind of abuse around so lazily on the social. The one thing that I was just so keen to do when that shirt became available was to just say thank you to a guy who, at the age of, let's not forget, he was only 19, 20 years of age. And he stood there in front of what was an enormous, I mean, the Valley's a big ground. And that home end, I remember, it was almost like looking at the Holt end that night. And they were absolutely baying for that guy's blood. And the way that we turned that game around, you saw it. It was only a couple of years later, like Miles Storey, you saw what pressure does to a kid like Miles Storey. And yet you saw on that night, like Stephen Darby was able to kind of shoulder that responsibility and get a slightly different result. And obviously it all ended in glorious tragedy at Wembley. But that night is just something else. And to just be able to think that we've put a smile on Stephen's face at a time where he probably most needed it is something that's going to remain with me forever. But crucially, we've been able to do it in such a way that we've opened the door to every single Swindon Town fan to come in and contribute to this sort of property. Now, of course,
any football fan, of course. And this is the thing, like, I just want to stress this. There have been people that have been willing to come out and have a dig at the person that provided the shirt to us. Now, I'll just say this. I know for a fact that shirt was an absolute king's ransom to come into that guy's sort of, into his sort of custodianship, call it what you will. I can tell you that we have secured it in order to then run this fundraiser, keep the cost as low as we possibly can. And we would not have been able to do it if it wasn't for that guy, first of all, having the shirt, then being willing to let us get hold of it. Okay. People's personal circumstances change, and we've got the shirt now. Stephen's now got the shirt back at his home. I've got the photographic evidence. It is there. We've created a real bit of magic, and it's something that we should all be very proud of. But please, 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 please get on board. Give us whatever you possibly can in terms of support. Retweet this, like this. Just share it with whoever you can. Get it out on all the other channels. Like, just give us as much of a clout as we possibly can. And just, like I said, it's all about saying, for me, it was all about saying thank you to Stephen. I never got a chance to say it in 2010. I've never had a chance to say it since. I think we all owe Stephen a thank you. And also, crucially, I think we would all like, if we could, to be there with our arm around his shoulder, sort of, helping him along the way. So, yeah, great. I think on a personal level as well, Hannah's, personally, that season was my first season supporting Swindon Town. I was a late bloomer. I was 11 before I went to a Swindon game, and that was my first season. And it was probably a false dawn, really, but I brought into the football club thinking we'd be in the playoffs of League One every season. The bastards didn't live up to their expectations. So that season was good, though. But to me, it's on a level to say thank you to Stephen Darby for that moment that he gave us all and gave me personally, as it is to see Charlie Austin walking back out in a Swindon shirt this weekend. They're both, to me, that like the Danny Wards of this world are heroes to me, because they captured my imagination and they made me fall in love with this football club. And to give Stephen Darby that, that memory of, not even a memory, just a reminder of the love that Swindon Town have for him after the 6 months that he spent with us, the memory he gave us, it's a really remarkable feeling, and I don't think I've ever felt anything like this before.
Tell you what, I will end this segment by just saying this one thing. On May the 17th, 2010, an ungodly hour of that night, when the final penalty kick was taken, Stephen Darby was there for us at a time where we needed him the most. Now Stephen Darby needs us the most, and I think you can see the reaction that we've had from getting hold of those shirts and getting them back to him, and just creating as much noise as we are. We're all there for him, and and
I would add to that as well, Hannah's. It would be remiss of us to not thank the lower league look for their input as well. I mean, the lower league look and Bradford City have really helped us along with this too. And you'll see some bits coming from Bradford over the next coming week or so. So I'd like to sort of on record place thanks to Liam at the lower league look, who's put us into contact with the right people, and has really given us a helping hand with that side of things.
We've come a long way since Owen Doyle. Let's just say
that's it. Yeah.
Well, guys, just one last thing from me that I want to say, because I think you guys are darting around the one word that sums up everything that I see this, and the recent fundraiser from Cads with his daughter and diabetes, and reach out to the fans as well, in particular to the gentleman that was selling the shirt. We are a family, and as a Swindon Town family, we need to stick together. We support each other, and we're there for each other until the bitter end. That extends out onto the pitch. And that needs to be reminded and remembered every single time we go to the county ground, that with the hopeful purchase of the county ground, that is our family home, and where we come together to support each other and be there for each other. And that's all from me on that.
Amen. I can't think of a better way to end that segment, Tom. Thank you. Well, look, moving onwards, and again, there will be, keep your eyes peeled, because there'll be plenty more to come in the good name of Stephen Darby. Ellis and Jason, you've been taking a look at Scott Lindsay prior to, obviously, the announcement that he's gone today, but obviously he has now gone. It is factual. He's rocked up in Richie Wellens sneakers at Crawley, and it looks like he's had a haircut, and he's bought himself a new suit, and he's being described by Crawley's own manager as what was the direct quote? Let me get it for you. As he's according to Preston, the Crawley owner, Scott Lindsay is experienced and proven. So we say a fond farewell to a very fine gentleman, but it would appear that his time at Swindon Town was fundamentally flawed. Would that be fair to say, chaps?
Yeah, 100%. I think it was sort of a long time coming, and a lot of people probably wanted it a lot sooner than it did happen. But sort of a lovely man, but probably not in the best interest of the football club, sort of to take us forward. But following on from that, I have basically compiled a list of the odds of the next possible manager of Swindon Town. So give me 2 seconds. So these are the odds as of yesterday. So they may be a bit dated. But these are just sort of managers that have been linked with Swindon. And the idea that I want is to sort of go through these, and then I want to get the panel's view on who they want as manager, and then I thought maybe we could put it to a poll for the listeners.
Sounds like a
give
plan to
little vote.
me.
Right, so we'll start with Chris Houghton. So as of yesterday, the odds were 6-4. And so sort of a background of him, he's recently worked as a technical advisor to the Ghana national team. At club level, he's managed 5 different clubs and successfully propelled both Newcastle and Brighton into the Premier League. However, his last job at Forest didn't quite go to plan, and he was sacked at the start of last season. Then moving on to David Artell, 5-2. Most Swindon fans will probably remember he battled it out with Richie Wellens during the 2019-2020 season, which eventually saw Swindon crowned as the champions. But he gave it a good go with Crewe. But that's sort of come to an end through sort of a loss of form and the sale of a few key players there at Crewe, and then ended up in his sacking in April 2022, and he's been out of work ever since. Right, then we move on to Paul Caddis, 8-1. Paul Caddis is safe to say a famous face at Swindon. He's currently coaching at Fleetwood Academy, but he's had experience here as a captain. He's played high up in. He's obviously played for Celtic, and he's also been promoted from League Two twice. So, from a personal perspective, I can see that he knows what it takes to get out of League Two. But whether he can transfer that on to being a manager, that's sort of a different question. And then the most recent manager that's been linked with us that come out sort of as soon as the announcement come that Lindsay was off, Mark Bircham. So his first sort of manager role was at QPR. He was a youth coach at QPR, and due to a suspension of the manager, he was put in charge for one game, which ended in a 2-2 draw against West Brom. And then so he was put in charge of Waterford, which obviously has links to Lee Power. But I think this was a little bit after Lee Power. I might be wrong. He was appointed manager on the 12th of May 2021. And they were bottom of the table when he took over, and he led his side to 6 wins and a draw from his first 12 league games in charge, taking the club out of the relegation zone and earning a new 2.5-year contract. And then on 23rd of November 2021, Bircham was sacked by Waterford. That's sort of where that ended.
I think the
obviously there's probably
about in summary. I think I'm very friendly with a few QPR fans, and they talk about Mark Bircham in the way we talk about Paul Caddis. He is. Paul Caddis is a Red. He hates Oxford. Well, Bircham is exactly the same. Bircham's playing career, particularly towards the end of his time at QPR, his hair was dyed blue and white hoops, and he is Mr. QPR. I think it'd be remiss of us to not draw that comparison. And I think the other thing about him as well is that I understand former Canadian international as well, so they play football at international level. A bit of an outlier.
sort of that's sort of my main list that I've got there. Obviously, there was the usuals that you normally get. I think there was Ian Holloway. We had surprisingly Ben Garner, which I'm sure a lot of Swindon fans wouldn't be too fond of. And I think I saw Paul Tisdale on there. A few stragglers, but I don't think anything will come
Paul
of those.
Tisdale is as much on that list as Robbie Fowler will be on that list.
Exactly, yeah.
I think the interesting thing, going back to Bircham, about Bircham is that any manager coming into Swindon Town in the current climate, the elephant in the room, of course, his name is Charlie Austin.
Yeah, 100%.
And Bircham will, of course, just by virtue of his time and his rapport with QPR, have a rapport with Charlie Austin. Like that will just be there. So being able to manage a perceived, quote, big character, or just understand that, the personality, that will obviously give him a competitive advantage against someone like, for example, a Dave Artell, who probably has never come across Charlie Austin at all in his career. If he has, he's been on the raw end of him. So,
the danger is, though, with a former teammate, is that Charlie still sees him as a teammate and not a manager. So the other two might have a little bit of an advantage because they come into the situation fresh, but have dealt with personalities before. Especially Chris Houghton. I think he's surely got to be the pick of the bunch. I mean, just looking at their win percentages, Chris's is sort of 50 to 40 on the clubs that he's kind of done well with, but David Artell is down at 36.5 and Mark Bircham hasn't really managed at top level before. So I think I would worry about Mark Bircham, if I'm honest, because I think that relationship with Charlie would be a bit too close.
I see what you're saying. One stat as well, sort of. I forgot to mention one. So David Artell, I believe it was out of his last 16 games, he lost 15 of them. So that's quite a tremendous stat. I understand that he lost a few of his key players, but to lose 15 games out of 16, it takes some doing.
Yeah, I think. Okay, so. Interesting list, by no means exhaustive, but I think, certainly, Ellis, if you want to beaver away in the background, I think maybe what we probably do is we just quickly rattle around the panel and everyone just say a name, and then
it doesn't even have to be off that list, just the manager that's realistic and that you want. I would say
so, and again, whilst that then goes to poll, we can quickly debate the pluses and minuses of the gaffer. Ellis, you if you're happy to sort of like get ready to scribe, Joe, give me your name.
Yeah, one name. I'll give you a name in Manning, but I wouldn't mind Birchall.
So you're going Mark Bircham, Ellis.
I'll go Manning.
Oh, you're going Liam Manning, are you? Okay, what about you?
Yeah, I'll go Manning.
Wow, I've been quite vocal on Twitter. I personally would like to see Paul Callis put into the role.
Callis for you, Ellis. How about you, Chris Kay? Where are you going, pal?
Got to be Houghton for me. He's got a bag of experience, not just coaching but managing at championship level and getting teams promoted, and presuming he is engaged in the project at Swindon, I think he's an absolute no-brainer for me.
Can I caveat my one, actually, Mark? Can I say Manning for head coach, but also Houghton in as whether it's director of football or just something football-based on board level? I'd love him at the club.
Okay. Chris P, how are you going, pal?
This is an interesting one here. I think with Bircham, since he was first up, he's grown on me a bit. Obviously, he's never really managed, but he's got a lot of coaching experience at various. He was a coach at QPR for 6 or 7 years. He's been in the MLS. He's over in Italy now with Como, I believe, where he's coaching amongst others Cesc Fabregas. It's a tough one to say. The thing with, a lot of Nottingham Forest fans were quick on to diss Houghton. And the thing about the worries, but it's not a thing to worry about really, is this type of football he plays. But at the end of the day, if he gets us out of this league, I'll take that.
Interesting. So then we've got 2 for Houghton, we've got 1 for Manning, we've got 1 for Caddis. Jason, who are you going for, pal?
I'm a big Manning fan, to be honest. I know he's up for the job at Portsmouth, probably against Wilder. I think they're both 2 favourites there. But if Wilder was to get the job at Portsmouth, maybe Liam could be persuaded to come our way. Just want to say something about Mark Bircham. If he's half as good a manager as he was a player on Football Manager in 2004, then we should go for him.
Mate, if that's the case, we're going to have Tonton Zola Makuku. And we will dominate the world. Tom, are you still with us, mate? Have you got a preference? And I appreciate you're not speaking for the whole of the trust, but who are you going with?
Definitely not speaking on behalf of the trust. I'm off the clock on that front in a large degree. I've been backs and forwards on this a lot because ultimately there's a lot of implications. Like Chris Houghton's experience is, I think, exactly what we need from a experience perspective. I personally felt that Lindsay was a little bit too raw in the role. Garner was probably about right in the level of experience, but ultimately, couldn't really come through. So I think my head goes with Houghton, but I would really love to see Caddis involved in the setup in some shape or form, because I think that'll be the link back to the club that we ultimately need as well. So I think that's where I would land.
Okay. Well, that then just leaves me and my opinion on it. And this is not just emotion speaking, because I think regular listeners of the pod and people that have been attending the county ground this year will know that I've got very, very good positive working relationship with this gentleman. But for me, it's all about Paul Caddis. And the reason why I believe Paul Caddis is the option, I grew up in an era where, I'm a firm believer that, look, whilst football has changed, football is still a simple game complicated by idiots. And I still believe in the fundamentals of putting out a competitive team that plays attacking football, that dominates the ball, that creates chances, that puts the ball in the box. I've spoken long and hard about Paul and his footballing principles and where those come from. And Paul really only knows how to play football one way. And much to Paul's credit, he called time on his playing career at a time where he was involved in a team that played anything but what he is, likes to be associated with. And that was that awful John Sheridan era at Swindon Town. And interestingly enough, talking to Paul recently, he was of the opinion that had it not been for that COVID season and that awful experience, he'd probably have managed to get another year or 2 out of his body as a professional footballer. But look, parking all of that, Paul knows how to get out of League Two. Paul's won this league twice. Paul's worn the armband on both occasions, and he's led from the front. Paul is a leader of men. Paul is very modern in his thinking, very modern in his approach. But Paul's operated at the very highest echelon of British football and has played in the Champions League for Celtic against the likes of Lionel Messi, Ronaldinho, Deco, Samuel Eto'o. He has operated at that top level. He has seen his frame of reference involves that level of football. But equally, he has watched football through all of the leagues, from the Championship to League One to League Two. And he knows what it takes to win and stay up in divisions and so on and such like. And he has been a main protagonist. So that's what's behind my thinking. Sorry, I've taken a little longer, and I said just give me a word, but I think it's really important because a few people seem to be suggesting that I'm saying Paul Caddis for personal or emotional reasons. The emotional part of the decision, however, is quite important because I think timing is key. And of all the managers that are being mentioned outside of Paul Caddis, not one of them has any skin in the game in relation to a connection with the Swindon Town supporter base, a finger on the pulse. And in the predicament the club finds itself in currently, Paul will give you that, which I think is actually really, really important. I think, you know, that in terms of just restoring a little bit of pride and a little bit of a connection with who's in the dugout, it'll be the first time in a very long time we've had that. And finally, let's not forget, Paul was a teammate of the gentleman that is making his big return to the county ground on Saturday. And that gentleman will, of course, need managing. And I don't care which way you cut it, Charlie Austin operating in League Two, there are going to be times where Charlie would be frustrated, where people would be frustrated with him, perhaps. We hope not. But the circumstance is going to need managing. And I think it's going to be a lot easier having someone like Paul managing Charlie Austin when he knows what buttons to press and vice versa than it would be a Dave Artell.
Can I follow on from that, Hannahs? Obviously, he's coaching at the Fleetwood Academy. So he's obviously quite adept at coaching younger players as well. And considering the average age of our squad, which I think is 23, it might be 24. It's only going to help. We've got a lot of young players. Off the top of my head, Jake Wakeling, Clayton. You know, all these players in our squad, they're only going to develop off not only Paul Caddis but Charlie Austin as well. And I just think when you've got Charlie Austin up top and Paul Caddis in the dugout, that's sexual stuff.
Well, I think
on that point, Ellis, as well, of when you've got Charlie Austin working with his youngsters, the videos that Hoops has put out on TikTok this week of like Charlie scoring in training and just different drills, the only voice you can hear in those videos is Charlie.
Yeah.
And honestly, like, oh man, think about
it's what we need.
Tingly skin, mate. I'm getting goosebumps.
Yeah, it's what this side needs. I felt at times we've needed a bit of experience. You know, our captain McDonald, he's arguably not the most vocal captain in the world. We've got experience in this side with Gladwin, Williams, but again, they're not vocal players. So to have a player like Charlie Austin shouting at you, you know, not just like shouting at you like that, but giving you advice, it's only going to be beneficial for the.
I think it would be an understatement to say that Charlie Austin's a vocal footballer.
Listen, I'll just pick up on what you were saying, Joe, about Chris Houghton, because I do think it's really valid. And if the rumours are true that Chris Houghton's been seen entering the county ground this week, I think, you know, listen, Chris Houghton's experience, Republic of Ireland international, you know, FA Cup finals for Tottenham, and that's obviously, we're just talking about his playing career. He's taken multiple clubs out of the Championship into the Premier League, and he's managed some of the biggest names in British football. So that as a level of experience. Now, a very, very close friend of mine, Stu, lives out in Canada now. He's just emigrated, but he is a huge Nottingham Forest fan. The quality of football that they expect is kind of like akin to what we expect at the county ground, and he was given like literally no real opportunity. The other thing that affected Chris Houghton at the City ground as well was his tenure there was pretty much blighted by COVID. So much like we've had a lot of ex-players from the COVID season come on and talk to us, and the senior pros really struggled with, you know, football matches in stadium with no fans. Well, Chris Houghton, by all accounts, he's cut a little bit of slack by Forest fans on reflection, because he was managing in an impossible situation for a manager that is used to packed stadium and all the buzz and all the gubbins that brings with it. So I personally, if you gave me Chris Houghton, if Clem was really going to open the checkbook, we could have Clem appointing Chris Houghton as a director of football type figure, alongside a manager or a coaching duo. I'd be accepting of a Mark Bircham type figure if someone like Paul Caddis was alongside him. But I would just need to, you know, I just would like to stress that if it was an either or between Caddis and Bircham, I'll go with Caddis. My final gambit for why I would go with Caddis over Bircham is really quite straightforward. We have had so much swapping and changing at our football club that I hope I've already demonstrated that Paul ticks a lot of boxes as a potential head coach of Swindon Town Football Club. And Ellis, you mentioned the fact that he's used to coaching younger players and polishing them up for Fleetwood, right? It's a very valid point. The thing that Paul will bring is a certain expectation of longevity that another manager may not bring. And I'll just paint this picture for you. QPR have recently appointed Neil Critchley as manager. What's to say that if Bircham hits the ground running for Swindon Town and he's absolutely flying, and then things don't work out for QPR and Critchley's out the door, then who is going to be their first target just down the M4 from West London? They're going to cast their eye at Mark Bircham. Sure as eggs is eggs, in the same way that we would if we exited with a manager and Paul Caddis was given an opportunity at Fleetwood and he was doing a decent enough job, we would be absolutely saying we need to be going after Paul Caddis. So for me, I think that we've got a really unique opportunity. There's a generation of football fans at a similar age to me that will have grown up and seen Lou Macari, no managerial experience. Ozzy Ardiles, no managerial experience. Glenn Hoddle, no managerial experience. Steve McMahon, no managerial experience. John Gorman, no managerial experience. Paolo Di Canio, no managerial experience. Richie Wellens' managerial experience before coming to the county ground was a short, ill-fated stint at Oldham. You know, we as a club are experts at giving people that have had glittering playing careers their first opportunity in management. And now I really do think we've got to get back to the heart of what Swindon Town's all about. And that for me is Paul Caddis.
The one thing though, Mark,
I can't believe you're... Go on, Chris, you go for it.
I'll say the one thing though, Mark, with Caddis that I think we need to mention is, does he have the necessary coaching badges to be able to be a manager?
Yes, he does.
At the moment. But I mean, even if they decide to go another way, I would like to see him involved.
Yeah.
For me, if it was a choice between Bircham and Caddis, I would definitely prefer to go for Caddis over Bircham. Just because Bircham's got a bit of an unknown quantity. Yes, he's got a bit of a reputation at QPR, but with Caddis, you're rightly saying, Hannes, you know what Caddis is about. You know what he is as a player and what he stood for, what he represented. It was that never say die effort on the pitch that you can only imagine as a manager that would just transcend into a young team. That you wouldn't be getting as much passing sideways as what we've experienced this season. You would be getting that raw energy, that raw edge. And let's not forget as well, Cads knows, Charlie quite well, knows how to basically probably push buttons and ensure that he gets the most out of him. But there's an element, even with Charlie in the club, he's only on a 6-month deal. Now, would Charlie be also interested in extending that in a combination deal where Cads and Austin basically run the show? And I think that's an interesting proposition to certainly consider. I definitely think that from a footballing experience perspective, there needs to be a guiding hand somewhere. Just a mentoring type role that's within the club. I think that would be hugely beneficial. But hey, it's a Swindon Town roller coaster. We're just strapped in for the ride a lot of the time.
Can I just add a comment to the managerial situation as well? Talk Sport have just tweeted saying that Liam Manning is set to be announced as a Pompey manager. So you can disregard my comment and we'll go for Bircham instead.
Well, sort of looking at the polls I put up a poll in the comments if you haven't voted yet. But we've had 33 votes, 36% for Manning, 9% for Caddis, 48% for Houghton, and 7% for.
You know what that tells me, Ellis? That tells me, like, Hanrahan, your days of a salesman as being a salesman are gone, and your railroading of this supporter base is not going to be tolerated in these parts. You're fired. That's what.
It was a nice try, Hannes, but it's not cutting the mustard. I think you need a big name there, and I kind of actually agree with you about the the idea of a guiding hand, but I think you probably need Houghton there as a manager and Caddis as the assistant manager or coach for a little while, with the aim to kind of swap them over. Interestingly, I was going to say before, I couldn't believe you were bringing McMahon up as a kind of good case study of a former player with a glittering career who did well at Swindon. His win percentage was only 36%.
So well, Chris.
He started so well, and then it all kind of fell apart, didn't it? I mean, I remember those days very well, and it rapidly fell apart under him.
Chris, tell you what I remember from that era. All the while, Steve McMahon had all the while, the relationship with the bank was good. Things were great. As soon as the financial circumstances changed and the overdraft was called in, things became very, very difficult. Andrew, you'll be pleased to know that Andrew Hawes is texting as we're speaking, Chris, and he's saying, "Hooray for the McMahon dissing."
I think me and Andrew
about McMahon is that season, was it 95, 96 when we won what is now League One? That was possibly my favourite ever season as a supporter. It's just, but that's all the good I can say about McMahon. I'm sorry, but
no chance, Chris. I think you've got to go for the Di Canio season, or potentially the playoff season where we just missed out against Brighton as two kind of outstanding seasons that we've had.
The Di Canio season was absolutely incredible.
Yes,
it doesn't. For me, the romanticism within it, I almost forgive the amount of money that he was given by the board, and ultimately led to a lot of problems in the financial realm. Can't forgive that point. But the romanticism of that season was just absolutely incredible. The dynamism of the fans, I've never experienced anything like it. And anybody who stands there and says, no, Di Canio standing in the middle of the pitch with his arms aloft with the Swindon scarf in his arms, that wasn't a great moment. They're not Swindon fans. They're just
glorious. We saw players play for Swindon that season that were Namibian internationals, players from Serie B. We had Dutch youth team internationals playing for us. It was an insane season. Let's face it.
It was, to quote Nick Watkins, management by hand grenade. It was glorious chaos. It was all of that and more. And
yeah, I think that's incredible. I mean, before we move on, I know what the next sort of topic is, Hannah. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to, obviously tonight's been a tough night for Scunthorpe fans, so I think we needed to have some sort of discussion around what the EFL needs to be looking at doing, or the FA needs to be looking at doing for ownership of teams being taken over. Obviously, we went through a tough time last year, and Rochdale have been going through some shit as well over the last 18 months, and I've been told tonight as well that there's going to be a campaign going around different trusts of football clubs in the EFL to be asking the EFL to change their fit and proper tests for directors. So I just while Tom and the trust are listening to the show, just keep an eye on your emails, guys, because I think there's going to be an appeal coming around for EFL trust clubs to be looking at their to be looking at the fit and proper tests.
As the owner of the social media for the trust, it's due to be noted, and something that will be discussed internally.
We wish fans of Scunthorpe all the very, very, very best. Yeah, as fans that have stood there and stared into the oblivion on more than 2 occasions. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemies. So we wish Scunthorpe all the very best. Just to wrap up on the managerial stuff, John. John's tweeted saying, would Chris Houghton not bring Paul Trollope with him? Now, that's an interesting one. I mean, there was a point in time where Paul Trollope was, very much kind of singled out as one of the, the real kind of forward-thinking young coaches in the game. Obviously, time's moved on, and Paul's had a variety of kind of support roles. But yeah, I mean, the notion of having a Trollope, excuse the pun, back on the touchline at the county ground is something that is laced with romanticism. But I mean, potentially the idea of Chris Houghton, Paul Trollope, Paul Caddis as a coaching makeup, yeah, that's something I think I would buy. I tell you who else is also very close with Chris Houghton is, of course, Northampton's assistant manager, Colin Calderwood, no less, who's doing a fine job up there with John Brady, and it was regarded by many Swindon fans as being yesterday's man. Again, have we missed the boat? But the notion of Colin Calderwood being back at the county ground supporting some kind of management structure that maybe includes a legend from more recent times, as well as obviously the captain that took us all the way to the Premier League without ever actually playing a game there. But yeah, thank you, John. That's a very, very good point mentioning Paul Trollope. Of course, we wish Paul and John and the rest of the family all the very best. So, look, we'll close off. We've got fun little segment of the show now. We've got, while the poll continues to attract its final votes, and you're all topping up on Paul Caddis, obviously. Joe, you've been taking a look at the return of the King on Saturday against Grimsby.
Yeah, I have, yeah. So, obviously, I was asked to do a little bit of insight or a bit of research on Grimsby. I'm not going to lie, mate. I haven't done it because, to me, Saturday is purely... It's a story of romance. I spoke about it earlier on. Charlie Austin coming back to play for Swindon. It feels surreal even now. He was one of the leading goal scorers with Billy Painter on my sort of first season of supporting the club. He is the equivalent of a Man United fan growing up in the early 2000s and seeing Ronaldo.
Joe,
and Rooney,
just pause there for a second. Right, here's a challenge to every single listener that's got their phone in their hand or nearby, or they're by their laptop right now. Tweet the show one word that typify that Charlie's return on Saturday means to you. Just everyone that's listening at the moment, just indulge me. On Saturday, Charlie Austin, whilst Joe is going to talk, whilst he's talking, just tweet one word that represents the way you feel about Charlie returning, and it could be as filthy as you like. But sorry, Joe. So, dear listeners, please crack on. But Joe, you carry on, fella.
No, I mean, like I say, to me, Charlie Austin is the OG goal scorer. I mean, he scored the first goal I ever saw at the county ground was his first goal against Leeds in the 3-0 win in 2010. That to me is a memory that I'll never lose. It's the first goal I saw go in the hallowed nets of the county ground was scored by Charlie Austin for Swindon Town in front of a full Stratton bank of Leeds United fans. I remember setting the expectations as they going into supporting the club halfway through a season that was really successful. And my first game being against Leeds, where it was a full house, Stratton Bank was rammed. It probably set pretty high expectations that it hasn't lived up to. But he scored the first goal that really kicked off the love affair for the football club for me. And it still doesn't feel real that he's going to play for us again. Genuinely might have a tear in my eye when I see him lining up to take the kickoff on Saturday at 3:00. Wearing the red and white.
I'll ask another question. Is he going to start on Saturday, do we think?
Mate, if he doesn't start, I'm looking out. Let's face it, he's got to start. Come on now. The club have been pushing it out. I mean, they've had their social media amnesty. They've been quiet, but they've been ramming out the Charlie Austin homecoming stuff as much as they can in the last 6 hours. If he doesn't start, something's going wrong.
Yeah, I do think we need to freshen it up from Colchester because that was just awful. So I'm not sure what they'll do. It's one thing I'll know that Gunning will be barking at them anyway.
Well, you know what? The one thing I think in relation to a Charlie start, I think there were concerns around sort of fitness levels, and he came back with inevitably a few bitter Aussies saying, he's returning to the UK because he couldn't hack it down here. He looked out of shape. He looked this, he looked that. I think everyone, for example, Andrew Hawes obviously was on the show last week and he was saying that, he looks like the guy looks svelte, right? He looks like he's looked after himself. He's not had a couple of weeks sat on the deck chair, or knocking the beers back. This guy's, he's come back. He means business. And you only had to look at the way that he was applying himself in Hoop's video today to see that, this guy's switched on and he is up for it. So I'm I'm with you guys. I can see him getting a good 60 minutes in on Saturday. I think he will start. I think we'll get 60 minutes out of him, and then I can imagine Jephcott replacing him late on, but only after Charlie scored a homecoming hat trick.
I think the
He
one
better
thing we
start. I'll
know.
put 50 quid in him to score.
I think the one thing we do know is he's not going to play 90 minutes.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
But I would like to see him start, because I think with the hype and the crowd will feed off that as well. So we hope we can get a quick start. It'll be interesting to see though how they do line up, because obviously it's a different manager. They might want to tweak things a little way, but something needs to change from Colchester. And the thing is, even at, I was at Northampton and whatnot, and we won that game. But if it wasn't for Sol Bryn, it could have so easily gone the other way as well.
Here's a question for everybody else on the panel, though. Take away what we've seen this season already. What is our best formation?
Tom, you need to listen to our show last week, mate.
Tom,
you talked about it a lot.
it's clearly a 4 diamond too.
I was to say, from someone who was at Mansfield, what we played that day is the best formation, and I don't think we've played it since.
Well, yeah, you're probably right.
Well, on that note, Chris, I think we played it one game afterwards and it didn't work, and then it got scrapped completely. But you know, in my head, it's the best game we played all season, and we scrap it after one game. I think you got to give it a good run in and try it a little bit more, because we clearly played the best in that formation.
I do think that formation gets the best out of Johnny Williams, though. Having him in that little gap between the midfield and attack, we got the best out of all of our players there.
I think with that formation, it tailors to our players, because to be honest, I don't think we have if you look at the players in our team, I wouldn't say we've got high-end wide players. So that formation sort of allows players to come into the middle a little bit more and be allowed into play a bit. Like, for example, Jake Wakelin. Everyone says he's better sort of in the middle, sort of closer to the penalty spot than out wide. And that formation allows him to come in.
But even with the dynamics and the changes, right? Like Charlie brings a completely different edge to how we play and the formation we line up in.
Well, 100%. You build the squad around Charlie Austin, didn't you?
Yeah, for sure. But the other thing as well that's really critical to say here is that the manager dictates largely the style of play in which we go for. I don't think we've really, apart from Mansfield, there hasn't been anywhere in this season that you can really hang your hat on and go, yeah, that's our best formation, that's our best team. And it's something that we know each and every week is going to dominate. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens against Grimsby, because it is, in a lot of ways, a blank slate start. And yeah, I'm genuinely excited that this could be the start of the season for us in a lot of ways.
In a lot of ways as well, we need to kind of find some consistency, and that doesn't. I don't just mean that in terms of the results, but I mean that in the lineup as well. There's been so much chopping and changing this season.
Oh yeah,
with the personnel, but also the formation. And I think going back to the Johnny Williams question as well about where he plays, I think his relationship on the pitch with Charlie is going to be quite key in this, because you're right, we don't have those kind of bombing wingers that can kind of swing the ball into sort of Charlie as a target man, really. So it's going to end up being slightly more kind of I don't know, kind of slipped in balls, kind of slide ball passes, that type of stuff from Johnny that's probably going to get Charlie in on goals. So but they need to kind of find those things, and if we're going to get promoted this season, they need to find a run, and they need to find it quickly.
So let me ask another question to the panel then, and overlay it with a question that you guys have that we've already discussed in a lot of ways. If we were to get Birchall, if we were to have Caddis, if we were to have Houghton, if we were to have Artell, what formation would we play? Under each manager, what formation would we play?
That really depends. That really depends on the players that are there at the time, if that makes sense. So there's a lot of talk of kind of, you know, McDonald and a few others going out and leaving in this transfer window, and I think it depends on the players that come in. So if you're relying on Johnny Williams as the kind of creative player, I think you have to play a bit more narrow. But if we get in some wingers in January, then you can kind of spread it out a little bit, maybe kind of go for a slightly wider kind of diamond, or even potentially, you know, fullbacks or something like that. It's too hard to say without knowing what the kind of the parameters are and who the players are.
We know that, like, Chris Houghton, for example, would be more inclined towards a 4-4-2, potentially even a diamond.
You would, yeah.
Chris Houghton would be a 4-4-2. I believe.
I think you missed one of the F's out there, didn't you? From what's his chops?
Chris, this is a family show.
Yeah, I'm not saying it. I'm not saying. I'm aware of my employers here.
What formation would Cadiz put forward? What would he build the team or aim to play the team in terms of a style of play?
Paul, I'm okay. So I don't think I'm betraying any confidences here. If I was to tell you that Paul, you know, one of Paul's preferred formations was the formation that he was deployed in under Di Canio, where he had that kind of telepathic link up with Cy Ferry on the right hand side of midfield, him in the right back sort of stroke right wing back position, and Matt Ritchie a bit further up as the right winger, left footed right winger. Now, to quote Paul directly, my teams may be outplayed, but they'll never be outfought. And I think if you take that and then apply that vernacular and start thinking about formations, I can imagine a rerun of the Di Canio era 4-4-2. I could see that.
I think the one thing with us playing 4-4-2 at the moment is our best wide players are fullbacks. We haven't really got any wide midfielders, and that's where I think we might be limited. Obviously, we've got a transfer window, so we can bring them in.
Spot on, Chris.
Dialeng Jayasimi, get him in.
Oh. God, bringing DJ back.
Look, DJ was rumoured to go to Gillingham. Gillingham had just bought Niang from Exeter. I don't know. I think there's a chance. I think if we had the money, or I think if we paid Charlton the money they want for DJ, I think DJ comes back, because I think he reluctantly went there in the first place.
Well, I don't know if he did, though. Like, it felt like DJ kind of orchestrated it in that terrible season.
I don't think he did. I think it was a case of, I mean, you'd be more in the know than any of us, to be fair, Tom. But it's a case of, I think Lee Power had decided he was selling up. And let's face it, DJ was our only asset in that squad.
Yeah.
And in Lee Power's last active transfer window, literally, like, what was it, 10 to midnight, DJ gets sold at the drop of a hat. I don't know.
Didn't he go for about 400 as well?
Oh, mate, I wouldn't want to think about it, not going to lie. I'm sure it's bought a nice house.
It was 300 to 400, I think.
Yeah.
Certainly within that ballpark.
How have the club benefited off that?
All I would say is this, that, you know, I mean, obviously we've got fast fullbacks, you know, potentially that can play on both sides of the pitch. If you can get Reece Devine fit, you know, that guy is very, very quick, very, very direct, and likes to get forward. Equally, Marcel Lavinier on the right-hand side. If Hutton does disappear, there's talk of Hutton potentially going to Peterborough in a swap deal for Joe Tomlinson, who we all know what Joe Tomlinson would offer down the left-hand side. I think if you look a little bit further up and move into the midfield, I think, you know, I think Tyree Shade has still got an awful lot to prove in a Swindon Town shirt, and I would like to see him get a run of games. Deceptively quick, one of the fastest players at Swindon Town in all of their running tests. The idea of Tyrese on the right hand side, we've got Morgan Roberts, of course, who's got I've said so many times, he's got one of the most exciting highlights reels on YouTube. So there's players that I think would be, you know, you would be able to immediately deploy that formation and give people an opportunity to prove themselves. But for sure, some surgery needs to be in terms of the January window in those one.
What thing you say about that is certainly on the right. I mean, you could play Lavinier at right back, and you could try Hutton on the right of midfield, because Hutton's such a good crosser that maybe he will be maybe a bit more effective further forward.
Yeah. Well, I mean, listen, we had the debate last week, didn't we? I think there's certainly an argument for it, but I think I don't know. We recruited. I don't care what anyone tells me. Like, I've been around football long enough that you look at the players and the volume of players that we brought in certain positions over the summer. We recruited for a certain formation that, quite frankly, hasn't worked. No matter which way you cut it. And the one formation I think the fans are crying out for, to answer the earlier question, is the 4-2. And if we're going to go down that route of 4-2 or a 4-4-2, we have to recruit. Like, we haven't got a choice. Like, we need, even if we've got bodies in the box that can play that formation now, we still need reinforcements. And yeah, some of the players that have come in that have underperformed have sadly shown the door in order to reinforce, I believe.
It's interesting, Hans. You said earlier on, one of the points you were making earlier on, that football's a simple game. And it is, and it especially is at League Two level. And I think what they've tried to do this season so far, and especially under Scott Lindsay, is they've tried to overcomplicate League Two by trying to play the ball out from the back, by trying to kind of play pretty football. And actually, League Two is quite a simple league. Bash the ball up front to a big man and score goals, and that's how you get out of it. You don't need to do anything fancy or complicated in it. And I think, that has been the failing this season so far. You want fast wingers, you want fast football. You don't, and it doesn't need to be pretty in League Two at all. It really doesn't.
No, well, listen, I mean, Chris, that's a beautiful way, I think, of probably bringing our show to a close tonight. A very eloquent way for you to complete your debut on the show as well. My good man, what an impression you've made on us. Well, look,
there you go.
Thank you ever so much. No, you listen. You're very right, and without meaning to just.
Can I just make one last point as well, Mark, before we go? Do we actually know what Morgan Roberts' best position is?
On the pitch.
Yeah, get out there, Morgan. In short, Chris, I think obviously he's been deployed in wide areas for us, hasn't he? So, hence my point earlier. But I mean, I can sit here and tell you, I know chapter and verse about Morgan Roberts. One thing I can tell you is that Ellis's poll on who we want, or who the Swindon Town fan base, based on 67 votes, so we're just about in intolerable sample size territory there. Liam Manning got 34% of the vote. Paul Caddis only got 9%. You godless heathens. Chris Houghton, 46% of the vote is your winner of the poll, with Mark Bircham scoring 11% of the poll. So Manning, Caddis, Houghton and Bircham, and Houghton takes the poll at 46%.
Hannah's, was it you voting that 9%?
Well, I might have sent a note to my children on my phone. No, I was above board. There was no nobbling of that vote. How dare you trust STFC's Tom Parrott? The irony. Now, listen, guys, thank you ever so much. Listen, I mean, Chris, thank you very much. Chris Kay, first and foremost, making your debut on the show tonight. Welcome to the Sir Tom Broadbent Lounge. Hope you've had a lot of fun. We're going to have a lot more fun with you moving forward, buddy. Thank you again.
Thanks, guys. Really enjoyed it tonight.
You're very welcome. Ellis, we haven't heard a huge amount from you tonight, mate, but thank you ever so much for all your beavering away in the background and your various...
My pleasure, as always.
Absolute treat. My brother in tonsillitis and being run down, Joe Vincent, congratulations on a sterling week's work, young man, and thank you for your efforts tonight.
Cheers, mate. Thank you very much. And also, special thanks to the Trust for their incredibly generous donation. So, please pass on our thanks, Tom.
Will do.
Cheers,
and
mate.
Chris P, thank you, mate. A pleasure as always.
It's always good, and it's been a good show tonight.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, mate. Thank you ever so much. I'll catch up with you very soon. And last but not least, from my panel, Jason, thank you, buddy. It's been an absolute treat having you along with us.
Thank you very much. It's a great afternoon, great evening. Thank
You're
you.
very welcome. I look forward to seeing the vast majority of you guys on Saturday at the County Ground, where, of course, we will be broadcasting live from the Legends Lounge between probably, I would say, well, we'll definitely be broadcasting from 12 o'clock, and we'll probably run through, given circumstances. I am not going to miss the King re-entering the pitch. So probably between 12 and 1:30, I would imagine on Saturday, you'll see us in the Legends Lounge. Please do come over and say hello, shake our hands, rub my bald head, do whatever you need to do, buy me a Guinness. Let's make merry. Tom, you're still with us, mate. Thank you ever so much again to you and Neil for your contributions earlier. We wish you all the very, very best with your vote, pal. And yeah, if there are any questions that come in, I will capture those and I will send them to you in another form. So to any listener that's listening in at the moment, if you've not contributed a question and you want it answered, send it through to me. I'll make sure it gets on to Tom, and by either myself or Tom, we'll get an answer to you by hook or by crook. Does that sound fair, Tom?
That sounds absolutely brilliant. Just one last thing from me. Well, two last things, really. Thank you ever so much for inviting us on. It's been an absolute pleasure to come on and be able to explain this bubble that we've been living in for God knows how long. And yeah, bring on Saturday for Charlie Austin.
Yeah, let's have it. Well, as you all know, regular listeners of Sir Tom Broadbent Lounge is an independent Swindon Town fan Twitter space. As such, the views do not represent those of Swindon Town Football Club or Sir Tom Broadbent himself. My name is Hannah's. It's been an absolute treat having you with us for just over 3 hours. Another mammoth show, you lucky devils. You're very welcome. Return of the King. Long live the King. Mi casa, su casa. Good luck to the trust. And we'll see you all on Saturday. Come on, you Reds.